started. I think we'll have a few more people trickling in over time, but I wanted to not lose too much time. So I'm going to ask Francis to kick us off with a few words, and then we'll get going. Not me.
I'm just here just to thank you for being here. This is a bit of an experiment, right? It's the first time we do this training. I understand I just heard you saying it's the result of a labor of love, because it's a topic that has been a long time coming. It's not just a topic, I don't know if you've realized, but it's a topic that has really come to the forefront of response agencies in advanced economies. But certainly people have woken up and realized that actually it's great to have fantastic emergency evacuation plans, but if you haven't taken into account the fact that you may be in a wheelchair or here or don't speak the language. If you look at the statistics at the time after the Japan tsunami, it's quite striking that people with disabilities, aging population, were much more affected than others. But it's also a very important topic in our client countries. And my view is also that it's not just an important topic when a disaster occurs, but in fact DRM very often is a very useful way to open the conversation about issues that sometimes may not be discussed openly. We've experienced that a lot on opening data, for example, where people are very protective of their data, but certainly when we talk of possible disaster in the face of disaster, then certainly we can open a conversation and we can go much further in topic of importance. And this one is probably fundamentally, I'd say it's fundamental in development in general, but it's really at the core of disaster risk management. Taken into account. So I want to thank you, but I also want to thank Charlotte and Margaret for preparing this. We're very much keen to hear your feedback on the training. It's something we want to start repeating. I think we're going to get to an online training. We want to repeat it for country offices and stuff like that. So please take note of things that can be improved, the things that work well. I think you guys have invested a lot to make this stimulating and inspiring. So I'm no doubt that this will be a great day for all of you, but please help us make this here. Charlotte, thank you, everybody. Sit again.
Charlotte's on.
Thank you for doing this. I'll disappear because I'm not the expert.
Can everybody hear?
Thank you, Francis.
And do we know if we have anybody on WebEx?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not going to say anything now. I'll just hand over to Cynthia.
Anyway, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I do hope you will find this stimulating, interesting, and that will open some new horizons for you. As we said, this training is a bit of a pilot, and we're going to do a few things in it that you may not be used to in some of the workshops you've been in. Some of you maybe are, some of you maybe haven't. But I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope you'll find it a good learning experience. And above all, too, everybody has super demanding jobs. I saw that button out in the lobby, how is your day? And I got, it says good, very good, bad. And I got the impression that a lot of people, the only time you'd press that button is if you go by and say, oh, it's been that kind of day. So I hope we can make a different kind of day. It's your space to be outside of all the pressures, the day-to-day pressures, and it's your chance to interact with colleagues, meet some new people, I hope, as well as learning some new things. So I encourage you to relax. It's pretty informal, and enjoy the day. So that's how I'd like to lead in. My name is Cynthia Burton. Most of you, few of you I know, but most of you I haven't met. I've been doing work on social issues, I'll call it, in DRM with the World Bank for about the past 9 years. It's actually quite frightening to me how long that's been. It doesn't feel that long. It's been a very long journey in terms of bringing together social perspectives and disaster risk management perspectives into various areas of the bank's work. So that's the sort of things I've been doing with you folks. And the reason I ended up in this role was that I used to work for some time with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, working on issues of vulnerability, targeting, and recovery, and various other related issues like that. And before that, I was working with the Australian government on crisis issues of political crisis issues, those kinds of shocks and events. So those two things kind of came together. That's just a little bit about me before we start today. And the usual, we'll start with the usual sort of thing anyway that you do. I'm going to just, apparently this is being recorded, so I guess if you're in the line of the camera, make sure you smile nicely.
Directly.
You're going to see a lot of my back, but there you go. So just to start, all of you signed up for this. This is really, really good. That means hopefully you're here because you want to be. And we did send out a little description of the course, but I'd just like to run through it very briefly, just so you know what we're about to do today. So the objective you've set for this, for the day, is to increase your ability to identify, to analyze, and to incorporate social inclusion into disaster risk management investments. The corollary of that is you're going to find through the day there's a lot of overlap of this with climate change adaptation work as well. So you could just as easily add climate change adaptation into that learning objective. We'll get to why that is a little later. The main 5 things that I hope we will accomplish today, and I hope that's what you were expecting, is to give you an introduction to some of the concepts and issues of social marginalization. I'll just mention that you'll see me using interchangeably almost the words marginalization and exclusion, because there is an overlap in that terminology, and we'll also look at terminology a bit later. But it's basically to introduce some of those concepts and to introduce to you, give you some information about how the World Bank overall approaches this and how we'd like to approach it in disaster risk management. A little bit about, quite a bit, about what are the socially differentiated impacts of hazard events and what are their causes. That's the start point for anything, is to know what it is that happens in terms of social exclusion and what is the effect of what happens in terms of the effectiveness of disaster risk management program. To look at barriers to making disaster risk management programming more socially inclusive. And as I said, climate change adaptation initiatives that are linked to that. What are some of the entry points and some of the actions that we can take to break down some of these barriers and to create more opportunities for social inclusion? And at the end of it all, of course, how are we going to know if we're achieving anything with what we're trying to do, the usual sort of monitoring and evaluation. How do we assess our progress in doing this and the results we've achieved? So that's basically what we've tried to design for today. Hopefully that's what you're expecting to get today. But just to be sure, I do want to do a very quick expectations exercise. I'm sure many of you have done this before. And that's basically so I can be absolutely certain that I'm touching base with you on what you would most like to get out of this course, what you most want and need. And to do that, what I'd like you to do is to combine it with introducing yourselves to each other. So what I want you to do is, there's a bunch of, I'm trying to use that American word, candy. We don't call it candy where I come from. There's candy on the table. I want you to pick up a candy, and I want you to find somebody who's not who has the same candy. If you can't find someone with the same candy, just
These are good.
And I want you to just briefly discuss with your new friend, just briefly what you most want to hear.
Find your
What
flip.
did you
Great. Yeah.
Put it very briefly on the post-it notes on the table and just whack it on that wall over there.
Yeah, I know.
Sound good?
Do any of you have these?
No? Then I go with you.
Get this one.
I'll change chocolate.
There's already some social engineering going on, like people searching their chocolates. I got
Yeah? Turkish?
There's no crunchy. He decided to take the other one.
It's very near these, actually. Hello. Christina. I think I've already seen you when I was with the Margarets. Anytime I go there. I have a hot. Doesn't it have something to sketch? Yeah. Oh, no, that's
Oh, you found their partner already? Okay.
How long have
So I would like to learn more about what the intervention is we can do. Like I would like to learn more from different groups or what are the days because sometimes we tend to look at the same ones.
In Japan,
We're just doing a little.
Like, I'm trying new to hear. I was
Talking about what.
And to be honest, and I don't think that's part of this course, but for me, I like for it to help me to see how can I help
It's really nice. Yeah, I mean,
no, like, I think that's basically pretty ambitious. But yeah, I think for me, guys, helping Margaret program there, but I haven't been mentioned personally, so that's why. Like, it's a challenge also for me to see how I can help others. I realize and they kind of discard it, right? So, thank you. Oh yeah, better. And this and it's sad because we hear
like a couple of markers.
so sorry, so short-sighted. Don't. Yeah, I think those are good.
it's actually to work with you know, but to actually awareness is
I cannot work with him. But when I just come here, he just
So like a
But
cost.
we are supposed to work together with him on the refugee social protection. That's what he did.
Also be like, yeah, what I think is interesting is
Social protection.
How they have this finance. And we know that the room is fully done without us in there. So I also matter that we pass through some chairs and then we flick them on the back and then we sit over there.
Our website.
Yeah, that's actually not true. I can play all the time. And then they told me there was a lady that told me that the I don't know. But we will move. Yeah, we will move to the back. Just a little different.
I think this is
You may not need to do that.
And you have it like yes, that would be good, no?
But I thought
Okay, guys, time to wrap it up.
the final version.
Yeah,
I will do it in e-learning and also on e-books type. Not just a PDF.
Well, it's good to meet you.
For sure.
Well, you said that the flakes are very good. Need to concentrate on this memo. This thoughtful memo.
Okay, everyone just about ready?
Hi, Liz. And you got it.
And what I'd like you to do anyway is just come up and gather around the wall so you can see what everyone else has written.
Recognizable. Say that you are very friendly and very.
They lied. These were supposed to be these super sticky type.
Guillermo, you have things over there.
We got everyone's? All right, one more. Last but not least, wherever you want. So let's just see. Okay. Learn and absorb how to integrate people with disability in DRM efforts. We're certainly going to have a focus on that area. It won't be the only focus, and we won't go into the same depth as you would if you had a full day just on that particular grouping of people. The same as some of you I think know we're having a gender course, for example, and that'll be a whole day just on gender. And hopefully in the future we can have a full day on disability, on Indigenous peoples, and on various other topics and groups that we find commonly need to be a little more attention. So we will do that to a certain degree, and we'll point you in the direction of where you can get more information if you want to on your own. Follow up. Ways to monitor progress of social inclusion. We will do something on indicators in the course of the day in the final session. However, this is one of the weakest areas so far in disaster risk management and social inclusion. It's limited what's out there. So what I think we're going to have to do, there is some resilience indicators being developed in the bank more broadly. We'll see what comes out of that, but we will also, I think, have to draw from the developmental social inclusion indicators. And they are a good foundation for a lot of this information. So that will be, we'll do work on that, but I won't be able to point you to that perfect, beautiful tool at the end of the day. Hopefully one day we will. Entry points, best practices, each one teach one. That sounds good. We'll be showing you a number of case studies and examples of, from all sorts of different aspects of disaster risk management.
What does each one teach?
So what we were discussing is that we would like to find a way to see how, with the knowledge that we get here, we can actually sensitize voters in showing that this is actually
Excellent. Okay. Did everyone hear that?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a few at the back. Can you say it again?
Sorry, so what
louder.
we were saying is that what we learned today also help us all in here to sensitize others about why this is important.
This is good. And we're going to be having a session this afternoon where in a part of that session, we're going to do a bit of a brainstorm on that topic. Let's see what we get to. M&E framework, we'll take a look. It's an introductory look. This is very much an introductory type course. So we'll give you some pointers, but it won't be like doing an entire monitoring and evaluation course, but you'll get some pointers. Discover further unconscious bias that I may have. Very brave. Who had that one?
Me.
Excellent. We're going to have a really good look at this one. This is a really important topic. We're going to be looking at it this morning. So we can do that. Develop ideas for the design of the Social Inclusion DRM project. Who had that one? Great. Well, tell me at the end of the day if we've done that for you. What types of analysis should be done to inform a project, and how do you set the parameters of these studies? We will certainly look at the first thing, what types of analysis. We may not be able to go into the depth of a social analysis. Again, in an introductory course, I could spend a whole day with you on how you do that. But we will look at some of the ways you can do it and some of the tools you can access that can help you to drill down very deep, as deep as you choose to go. And learn to integrate social inclusion into actionable items so that results are achieved on the ground. Yes! Yes, well, I hope that's what we achieve at the end of today. And again, who had that one up? Hi. Okay. Both of you. Well, tell me at the end of the day if you think you're closer to figuring out how to do that. This takes time. One training course isn't going to get you there, but hopefully it'll set you on the path. Role of social protection in this theme. That's one area. Who had that one?
On social protection, global practice unit.
Okay. We will touch on that a little bit, but we won't
I
go
can
into
get some
depth.
tips.
You can get some tips. And we can also point you to some tools and resources again as well. But in terms of each thematic area, again, because of time, I wish we could do, for example, an early warning segment and then do a community-based disasters management segment, social protection, but because of time, we have to keep it within a limit. So we'll do that to a limited degree. I think that's everybody. Good. I think hopefully we'll be able
I think you skipped the middle one. How to
operationalize these issues, particularly challenges in infrastructure projects. I think this is going to link back to the Each One Teach One session when we have a look at influencing strategies in terms of institutional partners and peers and colleagues as well, in terms of getting traction, getting interest, and also there will be a couple of case studies and examples of infrastructure programming that built in social inclusion. So that'll give you ideas too. Okay, there's I think so we can give you some of all of this, maybe not in exactly the depth on some topics you would like, but we can certainly point you to the tools, and we can do that all through the day, not just in the sessions. So just come up on breaks and that and ask if you want something on a specific topic, and we can talk about that a bit more as well. And Margaret, I should have introduced at the beginning, because you're remiss of me, you met them but not properly. So my three colleagues who are helping me out today. Margaret, I think most of you know, has a massive, extensive background in this area, so she is a huge resource that you want to tap into, and a highly experienced person. Same as Charlotte on the disability side of things, and because of her work in disability, it gives her deep insights into the whole process of social inclusion. Fair enough in saying that. So you've got two fantastic resources on social inclusion here, made use of them today at your disposal, and we've got Andres who's helping us too. And how would you describe what have you been learning along the way, Andres?
I'm just very interested in the social aspect of DRM, and have been working with collaborated in the Inclusive Community Resilience Program for about a year now.
And we'll also have joining us later for a panel. We have Maria Beatriz Orlando, who's leading the gender work and the operationalization of the gender strategy. Here for a little bit, gender tomorrow, for a little bit. And Clifton Cortez, who is the bank's relatively new SOGI advisor on education, gender identity.
All right, well, let's get stuck into it.
There's one here.
Oh, I thought that yesterday. So you managed yesterday? Yeah.
We're still waiting with bated breath for them to bring us our.
I didn't register, and I thought it was full.
If we're going to look at social inclusion, we have to start. It's a type of subject that can't be presented just as an intellectual and theoretical exercise. I could put up a concept framework, you could look at it and nod and say, yeah, that all makes sense. But the bottom line is that social inclusion actually boils down to individuals. It's about all of us, because we're all human beings. We are all born and raised in, particularly in the bank, in different societies, different cultures, different environments. And that affects how we view the world, and it affects how we view other people in ways that often we don't even know. It affects us and how we're viewing the world. So to look at how we work in this area most effectively, we have to first look at ourselves and our own perceptions of social inclusion and social exclusion. So that's what we're going to do for the presentation today. You've got 10 seconds. I want you to go, everyone look at the screen. 10 seconds, I want your very first impression. What is that man? What does he do for a living, and what kind of man is he? Quick!
Tattoo artist.
Sorry.
Tattoo artist.
Tattoo artist. What else?
Barista.
Tattoo artist, barista. Someone else.
Electrician.
Okay. What else?
Plumber.
Okay. What else? Tell me about him.
Chef.
Yeah. War veteran.
Chef.
Chef. Okay. Someone said body something?
Barista.
Bodyguard. Oh, I forgot the barista. Someone's very keen on that barista.
Someone needs coffee.
Normal.
Quick, I don't mean to think too hard about this. What's your initial reaction when you see him? Oops, sorry, that went back. When you first see him, what do you think?
It's German.
Kind.
Kind? What else?
Big.
Kind, big. Okay.
Strong.
Patient.
Kind, big, strong. Okay.
Open.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. We'll come back to him after.
Get to meet him?
You will get to meet him in a virtual kind of way. Okay. Okay. Now, sort of skipped ahead. So, this is what we'll look at. Some of the core concepts. In this session, what we will do, we'll come back to this gentleman. We will look to increase your understanding of social marginalization concepts and issues, and the World Bank Group's overall approach to social inclusion. So that's what we're meant to do. We're going to start with stereotypes, biases, and discrimination as our first subject. What I want you to do, two things. In your folder, you will find a list of important terminology to do with social inclusion. So if at any point you want to look at a definition, I'm not going to put them up here on the screen, but you can make reference to that list to find the definitions if you're unsure of bias, stereotype, and discrimination. You want to look at that. Just to start with that, how do I roll this? Andres, I roll this scenario.
You got it. It's rolling. When is it coming?
Here it is, yeah. Let's have a quick look at this.
Negra.
Negro.
When you think of Mexico, what comes to mind? Endless sunshine?
No, we're not going to think of Mexico. Yeah, I just want to get out of this and back to the other one. Although I'm sure Mexico would be wonderful.
You want the video you had before?
Yeah, just the back to the slide. Sorry about this, folks. It didn't stick like this when we tested it this morning.
Okay. How do we get back to the slide? Oh, wait, there it is, actually.
Yeah, go back to the slide.
You know what, Luis? I think it's an issue of money. Strictly. Because
Negra.
Negro.
Negra.
Negro.
Negra.
Aquí estamos.
¿Qué cosa es ser afroperuano?
Invisibles.
Yo siento que soy invisible cuando le digo a alguien que existe el racismo en el Perú y no me creen.
No me llamo ni morenita, ni zambita, ni morocha.
Invisibles.
Como que nos reducen a una cosa, un pedazo de carne, ¿me entiendes?
O sea, vas a buscar trabajo y tú ves en una página de periódico que dice, no sé, alta y no sé qué, te es clara.
Y es que todo lo negro parece estar vinculado hacia lo negativo.
Invisibles. Cuando digo yo no cocino, yo no bailo, yo no toco ningún instrumento, me dicen, ¿cómo puedes ser negra? Es una negra bamba.
O hay negros que ya no quieren ser negros.
Invisibles. Alguna vez me dijeron, ¿por qué no te le hacías el pelo para que te veas más bonito? Yo me veo bonito como soy.
No hay color ni marrón, ni moreno, sino negro. Punto.
Ser afro es alegría.
Diversidad.
Herencia cultural.
Familia.
Pasión.
Talento. Memoria.
Historia.
Presente.
Es futuro. Es vida. Es ser humano.
No somos invisibles.
No somos invisibles.
Aquí estamos.
Somos peruanos.
Somos
Afroperuanos.
Aquí estamos.
Somos orgullosamente afrodescendientes. Negro. Talento.
Negro.
Alegría.
Cultura.
Aquí estamos.
Orgulloso.
Orgullosa.
Soy negra.
Negro.
Somos afroperuanos.
Banco Mundial. It's made by the bank.
whites doing that. What do you think? Interesting, isn't it? I presented both sides of the equation for what it's like to be an Afro-Peruvian. This, by the way, was produced by the World Bank, this video. It's actually featured on a couple of websites. Well, I just gave that to you to give you some pause for thought about perceptions. It's again, what was it Francis said at the beginning? Hidden issues that people are often uncomfortable to talk about. Like if you walk into a meeting with your client government and start talking about this subject, it could be a little bit sensitive, couldn't it? Mm-hmm. But it's there. It's there. If you're working in Peru, it's there, it's hidden, it's something going on that you have to be aware of and deal with. So what I'd like you to do is to think about this in terms of your own life, your own work, and just using that as a bit of a thought provoker. What I would like you to do is at your tables, I would like you to share with each other a time when somebody either stereotyped against you or discriminated against you or somebody you know, and just to go through that definition. Stereotype. And I get somebody to read it out, please, off their page. How about, you look like you might have a nice loud voice. How about you read out to us the definition of stereotype?
An exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or group, a generalization that allows for little or no individual differences of social variation. Stereotypes are based on images in mass media or reputations passed on by parents, peers, and other members of society. Stereotypes can be positive or negative.
Okay, thanks for that. Can someone give us the definition of discrimination on the sheet? How about Luis? How about you read that one out for us? I need those two.
It's a behavior that treats people unequally because of their group memberships. Discriminatory behavior, ranging from slights to hate crimes, often begins with negative stereotypes and prejudices.
Okay. So that's just to have it in our minds, what do those terms actually mean? So I'd like you to spend, the whole exercise will be 15 minutes, but I'd like you to spend 5 to 10 minutes answering those questions in your group. Describe a time when this happened to you or someone you knew. How did you react, and how did it affect you? And then someone will be sharing that with the larger group. Off you go.
Who wants to start?
You're in India?
Not in India, in the U.S. I think this happens more in the U.S. than
I was born in Norway.
I can give 2 examples. I can start off because it's a difficult topic to talk about.
Yeah, almost the only one with an immigrant background.
I think in DC itself, it happened to me. I can think of 2 particular things. For example, if I walked into a bar, there were a group of 3 African American women sitting on the bar.
But now,
and immediately when I walked by, they went ching, 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 chong, 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 that kind of stuff. And so I think, so that's a kind of one thing. Another thing is when I was crossing the street, someone nearly ran over me. The guy rolled down his door and said, "Go back to China."
And how that made me feel.
Doesn't that happen to you?
To be like,
it doesn't happen. Well, it happens. I'm like, wrong country. So that was my reaction. I'm like, wrong country. But
and I did, yeah,
because it shows how ignorant they are. But that's another thing that's happened. But another thing that I've noticed. It's not so much personal, but I've noticed in the last 2 years in the bank, like I don't know if you've been to these BPU town halls,
it really sucked to be different.
Where all the senior directors sit on the thing. I don't know if you've noticed.
I had the opposite
Every
experience.
single one of
as
them
a grown
is white.
up already. I moved
Every
to
single, there's not a
La Paz,
single
Bolivia,
Asian
when I
representation
was
from senior directors in the bank.
And there I had
just
the opposite reaction.
that
and
is
also
very
made me
telling to me how the bank is changing
like
to more
you
colonial
go to
kind
a
of
restaurant
mentality.
and there's people waiting and they have darker
it's,
skin than you, and they
And
assume
nothing that I'm in a DRM, you know, the DRM women's group. Another thing a lot of us have experienced is this is new terminology that's going around in the bank, which is
and it creates an unnecessary tension, and for you,
whether you have gravitas or not.
And it's like
so it's the disguised way of saying you don't look male enough.
Like, because they are very
another woman, another woman. She was told
and you feel completely
she had all the qualifications,
like, just to think
but she was told, but she's so small. Do you think she has the gravitas to go and talk to government? So, she's there because she's skilled. She was able to get to that position because she's skilled. But the this and the thing what's scary to me is this person felt it was okay to say that at a panel discussion when they're determining whether she was good for the job or not.
In my family,
does she have because so now they're discriminating according to
size because that's like
was something that
and Asian people we look
to me that in Latin America
right? So she looks too young. Do you think she has gravitas? No, they're not talking about skills. They're not talking about anything like that. This is the new term that's vogue right now during the current recruitment. Therefore, people who just naturally look old, naturally look white, naturally look male, are getting positions right now.
And then Asian,
I've heard 3 people say this already, so it's real. It's not like one or three. So those are 2 things. One thing I noticed in the bank. So it's becoming very uncomfortable to work in the bank because you notice that
government officials. And they ask, okay,
for example,
how many years
just this string meetings on Friday.
How many years have you been? Yeah. Okay, good to know. So they try to gauge
urban development is happening in Asia.
You know,
you have Singapore, you have Tokyo, you have all of these. In Delhi, you have all these big urban development. Did you see the panel? Egypt, New York, Washington D.C., and 2 European. Not a single Asian representation.
I've been told in the past to dress older.
I think it's a move that's happening. Really, I've only seen this because I've been in bank 17 years. So
you have to dress like you're older.
And so have you, because we've known each other.
I think I've seen many men here.
There used to be a lot more Asians in management.
That I think
colonial,
I guess, or
the bank,
I guess.
And I've only noticed this. You know, when the whole recruitment of new senior management happened, then when you have these town halls, you see them on the stage. Every single one is white.
So there are 2 questions. One is how do you react?
Yeah.
And how does it affect you? I don't know. I mean,
so
those are guiding questions, I would imagine.
Yeah. But, for me, like how I react is shock. Is like
you didn't respond in any way.
The change that's happening in the bank over these years of where it's much getting more colonial. That's the only word I know how to say because it's all white dominated.
Still here.
Exactly. That's a lot. No, but it's getting.
I won't go into. I won't even touch.
Yeah.
You mentioned like,
so that. You know Yunji? She's in South Asia.
Christina, very nice to meet you.
Christina.
For me, recently I had a chance to discuss like my program with my just made a few comments on
pushing.
Coming from Korea. How like my country could
but they just assumed because I was speaking Spanish that they didn't even know what country.
I guess that's like one thing I vividly remember. It was a bit of a shock.
I mean, I was upset.
To me for them to say such
Yeah, I think that's the stereotype of the
typical.
Yeah, but then I'm like, I guess he didn't really feel or
we got off the bus.
I just thought that he might have some views about Korean students.
There are.
Wow.
I mean, I think that we face the 3 environments: the bank, the city, Washington D.C., and the world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that
I don't know if it
in my case, I have benefited from my stereotype quite a lot.
When I was working
instead of a negative,
I had a
everywhere.
manager.
say if I go to Japan, I think that I'm more amenable. I think I have it based on the stereotype. If I go to India, I feel like the stereotype also works in my favor.
I think so,
because I'm male and a Latin.
This is like we were discussing,
if you play the stereotype of the Latin,
this is the
sort
concept,
of group, Mexicans all the way down to...
He came from a country
and in
that's
the
more
city.
developed than mine, but
So the case that you relate to hasn't happened to me. It might be possible, but it hasn't happened. No, meaning I speak Spanish and somebody
starts pushing you.
For example, I feel like my kids have benefited all along from me being the sort of the Latin in the family. Meaning they have access to
media and now maybe
I
social
think
media.
that the chances of them being awarded with certain benefits at
read
school
about many things about maybe, for example, Korea.
come from me, not from my wife, for
Perhaps
example.
still kind of stick.
If you isolate her, they would say no. Bring me the diversity that we need in this school or in this activity, and that comes from me.
He was born in Norway, but he was
From the last name, from the nationality, and so on. In the bank, it's the same. You can do, so long as I feel like, there are certain character elements that you have to perform. So long as you are kind of like
and I was shocked because
an okay person, the stereotype can work in.
Colleague of ours.
And I have had this discussion because every stereotype can be seen in negative or in positive terms. It depends on the context you are working with. And I was wondering whether that was something to be explored.
But it's funny that you said that.
How much of a stereotype, because of the politeness or because of the political correctness of the environment, can work also in the other way. Therefore,
honestly, I didn't even realize.
you see more women on stage, for example, recently.
I was always
You
like,
see more awareness.
It's funny because you have a lot of
artificially, for example, nowadays you are organizing whatever, and you have to have.
They are trying to be like
There are more boxes.
But also with a
Meaning
lot of
there are more boxes to make the stereotype
and they say, no, we're very open.
more on the positive side.
which
We obviously react by saying that's
You're
artificial.
not, because I've been thinking.
Now you have a Latin. Now you have an Asian. Now
But they think it's like very
you want to create more of a positive environment, but sometimes it backfires.
So you can be discriminated by people wanting to be cool.
That's great.
Or be
So if you are awarded,
I'm so liberal that I'm gonna push
you in Latin, you think that that's an artificial, that you are an artificial piece.
Welcome.
In the environment you are working. If you remove that element, I don't know whether the kid will have the same access to certain things. That's I have many examples. Latins are supposed to play soccer, right? So you are in.
That kind of stuff.
Latins are supposed to be happy and dancers. Okay, you're in the happy dancing side of things.
Really interesting conversations, and they could actually go on quite a while. It's a fascinating subject, isn't it? I'd just like to very quickly hear from each group really fast summary from one brave soul of the essence of your conversation. So let us start with the group in the middle. Is that us? Speak really loudly. I've noticed this room, the acoustics are not brilliant, and I find you need to speak in quite a loud voice.
Well, maybe I can start and then people can pitch in. I think we had some good examples of stereotyping and discrimination. I think we talked both about how that made us feel uncomfortable in that situation, being put in sort of a box, and that someone made assumptions about us without really knowing us or having asked us. And then I think we also sort of talked a little bit about how that person or people, in either plural or singular, reacted, or how we sort of reacted to them, and how that sort of interaction can go, how both you can sort of help address some of those stereotypes, but how that can also be very, very difficult.
What was one of the ways you thought you could address them?
Well, I think one we talked about was sort of confronting it, and perhaps, different ways that you might want to confront it in what way, but there are, but then there are sort of constructive ways of confronting it, but there are also sort of the ways that you initially just feel like you want to address it, right? And those are sort of two different things, more sort of perhaps an emotional reaction initially. Then I think that there are more sort of thought through strategies, if it's more sort of than one person you're meeting, more than, a situation you're meeting in a context you're working in, for instance, or in what we're talking sort of traveling in, or somehow acting in, trying to fit in a way that still makes you comfortable, right? That sort of doesn't take away your ability to be you, but that somehow sort of tries to meet the context you're in sort of halfway.
That's an important point.
That summarizes.
Something we're uncomfortable actually with saying we're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's where we begin some of that distancing, isn't it, of ourselves from others. Because again, we don't know what to do. I want to do the right thing, but I don't know what to do. So lots of reasons there. How about over here? Very, very quick summary. At our gender imbalance table.
I mean, there is. You can take the stereotype in an isolated way and the discrimination in an isolated way. When the two, we discussed here generally, when the stereotype and the discrimination match, that's a disaster, right? That's where you see, hate, totally disruption of the, social life and communication and so on and so forth. And there are many different types of stereotypes. We related to some cases of stereotypes that end up in discrimination, serious discrimination. There are some stereotypes that actually end up working in the favor of the stereotype person because of certain rules of behavior that have been developed recently. For example, politically correctness around gender makes women, the stereotype of a woman, be more in favor of the male, irrespective of the talent or of the context. There are issues of misrepresentation or underrepresentation. Certain nationalities or how would you say, an Asian is always underrepresented. Probably the stereotype around, an Asian makes them, be underrepresented. And some other groups are overrepresented, say the typical male, white, and so on and so forth, remains kind of like the dominant force. It ends up probably in discrimination. And I don't know which one of the two values are the ones that create more trouble in society.
I'll keep writing and come back to something. And last but not least, group.
So maybe I start to you one. So I think we've talked about different types of discrimination that we've suffered in the group, based on, or that we witness, based on race, based on gender, and also based on nationality. And we've also talked, we didn't talk that much like this group about, how to react to it, But we had something along the lines of the second group, where we were actually looking at how sometimes we've been discriminated by people that think that they are very open, and they want to be so open that they discriminate you. So, that's, for example, if you are in a mixed race relationship, that sometimes they come and say, "You look so cute." It's like, would you say the same thing? That kind of thing. So we were looking at examples also like that, no? Where, as Luis was saying, that sometimes because you have certain nationality or race or gender, somebody tries to favor you as well. So it's how it works both ways between those that have the bias in a negative way and those that think that they don't, and they are even more, they discriminate you even more.
So that kind of links back to what the second group was saying, that you can end up with stereotype. You can end up with both positive and negative stereotypes of different groups of people, and that can have both positive and negative impacts on them. That's why I put summarize that.
And Cynthia, just one more thing, where you have there put in a box, one thing that came up in our table is how hard it is to feel different. It can be to feel different, to be different.
And this is an important issue that I hope we'll come back to later on today too, because this is one of the areas that we avoid talking about a lot, and just sweep it under the carpet, which is the different feelings that different people have when one group appears to be getting favored over another in their perception through a policy or an action or a behavior. So I'd like to come back to that a little bit later. But it's interesting. I was just writing a few sentences while I was walking around listening to the feelings that people have had at different times in the box. And someone said over here that, but it wasn't who I was. There were layers and layers of stereotypes about me, but it wasn't who I was or who my family was. I think all of us, or most of us, have at some point in our lives felt that way, that somebody was perceiving us in a way that wasn't who I was. More often they're negative than positive stereotypes, but we do have positive too. And somebody said something that I just decided to write up. It really sucked to be different. And that's certainly a feeling that people get from time to time. Okay. So we've looked a little bit at your feelings about when you've been discriminated against, or somebody close to you, just had some thoughts about it. I'd now like to reverse the mirror and have you do a second exercise that's quite similar to the first one. And we'll introduce this one with a video as well. But the reversing of the mirror is, you know how we feel when people stereotype us? What happens when we do it to other people? Because we do. We all do. This is the horrible video thing again, which does not seem to be working the way I wanted it to. Oh, I was going to show you who he was in between. This is Dr. David Orris. He's a graduate of Columbia University Medical School. He loves tattoos and motorcycles. He loves bikies. He loves leather. What do you think he does as a doctor?
Pediatrician. Surgeon?
He does what?
I thought it was a surgeon.
Brain surgeon.
In a way, what he does is he started an organization in New York City that removes tattoos from men coming out of prison or leaving bike gangs, and particularly from their necks, faces, and hands, because they have terrible trouble getting jobs because of their tattoos. And he also has founded a health cooperative with all sorts of volunteer doctors for employees of restaurants in New York City, for about 30 restaurants. So he's a pretty interesting guy. And he has to dress like this when he goes to conferences and things like that, because he faces image issues. As soon as people see the tattoos, and he's covered in them, their mental perceptions of what sort of person he is change. So he's a kind of interesting guy. And that's a quote from him. Can You read it at the back, can you see that? Just the fact that you help someone can change their perception of the world, another take on perception. I think that helps them know it's not so bleak. An interesting guy. So now we're going to look at the reverse side of the mirror. We're going to look at this video, and I just, oh, there works.
WhatsApp.
But that doesn't do all those
Can
funny
you
things
tell
that
her?
Trump wants.
I'm not sure whether we have a meeting. It's at 11. No, it's at 11. It's at 11.
Nice to you.
What happened to you?
What's the deal with that thing?
But you're so pretty.
Yeah, it's totally accessible. There's just a single step.
No, I totally understand you. I get so frustrated when the elevator's broken.
Jesus will heal you if you keep praying for it.
So you work?
Oh, you work? Oh, how nice.
Don't you feel embarrassed when you're out in public?
Yeah, I sprained my ankle once, so I totally understand.
Are you a puppet?
Hey, dude, can you get a DUI on that thing?
Beats walking, huh?
Oh my god, you are such an inspiration.
You are such an inspiration.
You're so inspiring. I could never do what you do. My grandma uses a wheelchair, so I totally understand what you're going through. Beep, beep!
How fast does that thing go?
Go, Speed Racer, go!
I don't know how I could get myself up in the morning.
Hi, I'm John.
Hey, my nephew's in a wheelchair. Do you know him too?
I have a used friend, Tom, who's in a wheelchair.
My brother-in-law is in a wheelchair.
Hey, my roommate's brother Mark is in a wheelchair. Do you know him?
So, can you,
Have sex?
Does it still work?
Can you have sex in that thing?
Oh my god, your disability makes me feel so shitty about my able-bodied privilege.
I found out my baby has your disability, and I was about to abort it. But then I met you.
You're so inspiring.
You are such an inspiration.
Can you, have sex?
I wake up feeling rotten about my life, and then I think of you.
Oh, that sucks.
But you're so pretty.
So can you,
Can you still, Can you still have sex? Just wondering.
You are inspired.
Can you have sex in that chair?
Forget that wheelchair. You could just sit on my lap and ride me.
There's a whole series of these that just record and fill in the quotes that people have said to people with disabilities. So, did you notice the ones in the middle? We were talking a few minutes ago about that uncomfortable feeling, what do I do? Did you notice the ones they showed where they're just sitting there, 3 or 4 of the people?
No, Down syndrome does not slow me down. It's just what I have in me. I do have Down syndrome, but that's not going to stop me one bit. See, I live on my own. I clean the house. I do exercise. I walk my dog. She's an outside dog. And I got 3 other brothers. They don't treat me special. My name is Bob Joseph Hubler. I'm from Indiana. A Hoosier fan.
Does that ring a bell? Have you ever come across people that sort of... Have you come across, Charlotte, people that sort
Every
of...
single one of those quotes I've heard.
Did I say any of them?
No. Not yet.
So, Charlotte, maybe we're going to do a similar exercise to the last one, maybe just before we do it. Just tell us, how common is this? Because people often think, well, that doesn't happen very often. I've not seen it. How often does that happen?
So, I think I experience a microaggression probably every single day. And I think if you look at it, and I think the levels vary. It can be, a silly comment like, oh, wow, how fast can you go? How fast you can go, people say in the MC building to me all the time. But then you get the more kind of, comments that really kind of work on you and get you down. But I think for most people with disabilities, I haven't, let me put it differently, I haven't met a person with a disability
who hasn't had somebody come up and say crazy stuff to them. And sometimes it's direct, and sometimes it's indirect. Sometimes it's subconscious, and sometimes it's a very conscious statement. So I think it's very much part of everybody's experience.
And does it happen in this office? Is that every day?
Yeah. I mean, in the bank, for sure.
So it happens here too. So the exercise, this leads nicely in, and I might get at the end of it, Charlotte, for you to comment on it, since Charlotte's our disability specialist. I want you to do a similar exercise to what we just did, thinking about that. And in your group, describe the first time you met somebody with a disability. How did you react? How did it affect you? And share your summary again. Be honest as you can about this. Go for it. You have 5 minutes.
I used to be a helper for. I used to work for an organization called
with the intellectual challenge.
I'll start.
Yeah.
So
I don't know the job.
I think
It's
my
was
earliest
Japan,
memory is
where I used to work
I had
for.
an uncle.
I was a helper
I'm
for
from
3
Louisiana,
disabled
South
people,
Louisiana,
so
which is a
my
very
experience is very different.
Three of us
That was my
went to
job.
the same
My
school.
father's
And basically,
family
there was
had
a
other people
habit of
for me, it
intermarrying
was
with
normal.
first
So
cousins.
my parents
So I actually
washed their
had
hands,
several
I took
cousins
them to the
and other
bathroom,
relatives
I
who
wiped
were
their
the same
butts,
in some way, usually
I did everything.
but I had an uncle. The one I remember
Because
earliest
Japan
on
is
is
very
that I had an uncle who
unfriendly
was
to
mentally
wheelchair
retarded,
people.
but otherwise completely physically strong and active like any
in the other
average person.
way, it becomes
the instant door, you know?
When I first met him,
It closes
he
so
had difficulty
quickly.
speaking,
A
and he liked
wheelchair
to converse.
So you have to have someone
I
like me
was
standing there so
probably
it doesn't
four,
close.
my earliest memory,
Well,
and it scared me
it slams the
because I
wheelchair.
didn't know as a
And
young
most
small
supermarkets don't have
child
elevator.
how to process
So if they want to buy
adult
something on the second floor,
who was like
they
everybody
can't.
else, but somehow not at all.
If you really think of the daily lives, it's very unfriendly.
In my reaction.
But
I
so
didn't
I did that as a
I had
job.
a similar. I had a cousin who had a mental disability and was a couple of years
I
younger
understand
than
if I grew up in just a normal
and
I will never understand.
and she would get
how
very
I feel,
frustrated
how
and
people
sort of
feel.
act out
Yeah.
and become sort of
family member or to be
Exactly. Like, yeah, because the lady I helped, she loved to
I
drink,
think I had a
but she
younger
could
brother
only
who
drink when
wasn't
I was
very
there.
old, and I guess
So, because she had to be carried down to the bar
handle
and then
that.
carried back up.
And
So
how to
when she was
handle
driving her
that,
wheelchair, I'd be like, "You're driving
acted
drunk.
out
You know, we'd
the
have fun with it."
frustration.
That's exactly because you deal with it
mostly
every
because
day.
I was worried for
But other people
my brother
who
back then, which obviously I can see
might have a
now.
different experience.
Yeah.
First time I don't my grandmother, so she's a family members, and she had a serious which was
all my memories of grandmother living
enter into it. But thinking about the first time growing up in India, maybe it was or that person's, that child who's kept away what he was about, does not seem family function, a party. I think it is hard. Getting imprinted by stigma everything depending on where you grew up. It's God's will.
That's marked my life.
You look at them
It is.
like just like some of the ones who have
How old is she?
she's absorbed those. She got transferred and none of them with those perspectives changed. I think when I saw, for example, opportunities back in the list, memory possesses lost you in all nice. Like I was only when I saw something.
When I was around the room where together was
Yeah.
So I really respect my grandmother.
It was the
Something I
same
cannot
stuff.
speak, so I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
I also need to show him the respect.
I had an interesting moment that I was interviewed by medical team, which was researching about families' behavior to those kids with the intellectual challenges. And then the doctor asked, okay, what do you think the most needed support for the family, who has a bipolar kids? And I said, the money, because simply that, we need to send these kids to the special school, and that is not a public school, and that's not good enough. He was so shocked by the fact that, I was so honest, and then I brought up a kind of monetary issue. But then, it's true. I mean, I was born in a small village, so basically there was no special schools. We need to send kids with the best school if you want to extract the most of the value.
On that, on what you say, for example, I think there is a lot that can be done not only at the family, similar of what you were saying, at the family, but also in the society where you live. Because, for example, when I was growing up, there was, very Catholic countries, and even the divorce was forbidden. Nobody would ever had an abortion. And, at the time, when people were pregnant, there weren't even all those tests to see what's going on. And a lot of families had kids with Down syndrome. And you grew up knowing that they are different kids, but they are super sweet. And they are really funny, because they laugh a lot. I mean, they remain innocent always. They have this beautiful thing that we actually lose. So growing up, I mean, I don't remember. I mean, I think that when they become teenagers, there was a bit more of discrimination because kids and teenagers can be pretty evil sometimes, no? But I don't know. It was like you grew up and they were telling you, you have to especially protect so and so and so. So we would go to the park to play, and everybody will make sure that they don't get lost. Like kids protect themselves as well, but it's a matter of, also what you hear at home, not listening like, oh my God, look what happened to him, or, because you, as a kid, you actually, I think that you have more of an ability to overcome all those biases, and whatever you hear at home or, in the peer group, it does affect a lot. And in fact, in Spain, there is this organization that is called ONCE, which does a lot of things for the blind. And they're everywhere, and so they have their own national games, and that, and we used to play, when we used to play, and this is discrimination on the other way around, we used to play, and there was always someone that wanted to be the blind one, which is pure discrimination at the same time, if you think about it. But it's, it's this kind of thing where I think if you teach people from the moment that they start growing up, we could overcome a lot of those discriminations.
This innocent reaction is really painful. I think that was the same things as you're saying, these people try to be cool, giving you a very sweet comment, but then no, it's so mean.
And for example, one thing that you say, I mean, I've seen it a lot in old buildings where the elevator is not at the level of the floor, and then somebody in the building has an accident and end up in a wheelchair. And the co-op has to get together and say, we actually need to bring this down. And I've been in buildings when one neighbor...
Yeah, we did that.
No, because it costs money, and there is only one in the building, and years passes by, and then it's that person who ends up being old and maybe in a wheelchair, and then pushes for it. It's so mean. So it's like the economic thing, it also impacts, because then this family has to move to a different place. I mean,
But no.
Maybe you can introduce.
Yeah, the dyslexia. Yeah, that's true.
I think that's what I was thinking about. Yeah, a lot of the countries where we're working, right? It's exactly right. I mean, a lot of the
I think in the end it's connected to the unconscious bias we all have.
Get opportunities from their government, society, etc., to actually move into that. Where I'm from, that you don't really see that. You see, the large majority of
maybe she can help you introduce, some people that can support, like a support group.
It's also about context, yeah.
We discuss about different things within
young
people.
Sorry.
No. we discussed about the different personal cases. Then we ended up.
Yeah, they still. Do you know what? I'm going to suggest you even stand up.
We discussed about the personal cases, and we realized that how much unconscious, discrimination or kind of perception we have, and we had like some people that who have kind of challenged people as a family member, and how we encounter, to deal with the situation. But then the conclusion was we couldn't figure out how to react because we also sympathize with the people who never, had that opportunity to take it as a personal experience. So we also need to understand people who doesn't know how to deal with the situation or who are unconscious to say something a little bit mean things, for a receiver.
Thank you. We'll go with table at the back.
Jeanette, it's yours. Are you Jeanette?
Oh, yes. Give us your best, loudest, theatrical voice.
Actually, I'm a parent of 2 children with disabilities. My daughter has cerebral palsy. She's now 35. And my son, who will turn 23 next month, has bipolar disorder. For the daughter, that was easy. But my son, he had cancer when he was 16. And after that, we discovered that he has bipolar disorder. Of course, it was really, really painful. First, after the treatment of cancer, after 6 months, we have to go through all these kind of course and then all the treatment and then post-treatment effects. And also going back to the same cycle, saying that now that he has a bipolar disorder, how do I deal with that? So it's really painful to see your son suffering because of course each time, okay, my life will be like that all the time. I have to take pills every day. But I'm just telling him, this is a wonderful life. If you don't have this, you have another thing. So I tell him every day is beautiful. So, that's the way I cope with that. And then also it's learning from what I'm telling him. So the life is full of challenges. Yours is nothing. So yesterday was also because he has his up and downs. So yesterday I sent him a video of someone who is completely disabled on a wheelchair, kind of half, we say half person. And I said, look at him. He even seems like he's not disabled. And he's happy to enjoy life. So therefore,
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Move to the middle group. Thousands were trampled in the rush that ensued.
Well, we have also discussed experiences, and many of us, family of those people in school that we went to who were disabled, and I think the notion was that coming from different societies, how society reacts to disabilities. There are more privileged societies that can do more and facilitate people with disabilities to kind of integrate into a productive way of life, and there are others where people beg on streets and they don't have the wherewithal to be able to look after themselves. And we spoke about how we reacted to those we encountered with disabilities, compassion, love, amazement, also at the fact that they were able to do what they were doing and leading happy lives, showing respect, all of that.
No, I said fear.
Yeah. Fear also, yes.
Sorry. We had a range of fear.
Sorry, what was the fear?
Fear.
Fear. Well, I was very young, and it was a family member, and I didn't know how to digest this adult person who was very much in our lives, who was different from everybody else. And at the end, really interesting is that I think everybody at our table, it was about a family member who had a disability. Everybody had an example of a family member, which I found interesting. I didn't realize it was quite that common.
Okay,
which
great.
led us to think that everybody has had an encounter with a person with a disability. It's not something kind of obscure.
Yep.
It may be a different encounter, but everybody knows somebody who's disabled.
Absolutely. And somebody at the other table mentioned that a lot of older people end up with disabilities, so many older members of our family end up with lots of issues. I'm one of them.
For disabilities, I would assume that there is a stereotype, but it's more complex to identify, correct?
Yep.
And therefore, the discrimination side is totally different because you don't have kind of like the pattern against which you can discriminate. Typically, I wonder whether disabled people face discrimination the way that you see it in other type of groups.
What I'm going to suggest with that one is I'm going to let Charlotte respond to what's come up. And so we had statements about a hidden bias but didn't know how to react. How painful it was to see family members suffering in some way if they had an issue. And but the importance of reinforcing the positivities, the positive things in life, showing respect. These are just a few of the sentences I took down. And also a comment about fear. What do you do when you're feeling fear? And also you were young, you said too. So when you're young and you're feeling fear, but even when you're older, you're feeling fear. My first encounter was when I was in my late teens. I volunteered to help take people with spinal bifida out on outings and training workshops so they could participate and to be their carer over weekends when their main carers weren't working. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I wasn't trained. I was sent out with a person the first time, frightened, uncomfortable. I was feeling 100 raging emotions, pity, you name it. And all of this was not particularly helpful. And the stress for me and the stress for this guy was enormous. And I almost quit ever doing it again. Such a bad experience. That was my first one. Anyway, the last one too, we had Luis's complaint. I won't write it because you can respond now. But you were asking if there are differences in how...
As part of the general topic, right, of stereotypes, discrimination, and these things, it's not clear to me. Well, that's...
Charlotte, can you give us some perspective?
So, I think one thing to think about when we talk about disability is to recognize that persons with disabilities don't make up a homogeneous group. So there is a vast variety of types of disability. And I think there are some stereotypes around how we perceive people with disabilities. One is that we often think about ramps, right? Because of the disability sign, where you have the person in the wheelchair, people often think about, if I'm doing something to include persons with disabilities, I'm building ramps. Ramps only work for people, ramps is only one part of it, right? You've got people who are blind, you've got people who are deaf, you've got people who have intellectual disabilities, people who have mental illness, you've got people that have multiple disabilities. You've got people who are deaf-blind. And it just, it continues out that way. So I think that's one important thing to get our heads around, that it's not just, it's a very varied group of people. And I think that's an important piece of information when you think about what discrimination could look like. So for instance, I would feel discriminated against if I wanted a job, if I was going for a job interview and I got there and there were only stairs because I wouldn't be able to get into the building. That may not pertain, that type of discrimination would not pertain to somebody who's blind, for instance. But if that person goes into the interviewing room and the person says, oh, you're blind, I'm sorry, you're not able to do that job, then that discrimination would be different. So you have discrimination that's based on the type of disability, right, that's specific to the disability. And then you just have the kind of broad strokes of discrimination. I think the other interesting thing about thinking about disability and discrimination is that perhaps more so than other groupings, you have a lot of direct or indirect discrimination. Right? So often people will say, well, you know, we don't discriminate against people. We will employ anybody. But there are no accommodations to facilitate that person in employment, which means then in the end the consequences of that are that you're excluded or discriminated against. You know, there's a whole body of jurisprudence around disability discrimination, and I think it's an important piece for us as a bank to start thinking about, because as we go to the rollout of the environmental social framework that has a standard on non-discrimination, which covers some specific or prohibits discrimination on specific grounds, including LGBTI and disability, we need to start being teed up about what discrimination could potentially look like vis-a-vis our own projects. So, I mean, I think we all come with some kind of personal experience, which is good, but sometimes it's actually not good. I mean, your example is not a good one, right? In the sense that your first experience was not a good experience. Exactly. So, I mean, I think we come with that personal baggage, positive or negative, and that we have to be mindful of that, but then think about how we address the larger parts of inclusion. And I think, you know, Margaret's slide on unconscious bias is so important, because we all have our biases. I mean, if anybody gets up in this room and says they don't have any biases, sorry, I don't really do. We have them. But it's recognizing that we have them and then being able to deal with them and you know, begin to address them is really an important piece of dealing with any kind of discrimination.
Can I also ask for Charlotte to comment on what came out of one of the tables in the last session, which was in terms of moving forward with battling against discrimination, battling against these kind of issues in the workplace and the work you do. From your point of view, do you feel there are risks of creating new stereotypes, instead of politically correct, of inadvertently creating a false image of a group or putting them in a position where they become uncomfortable for being put in the spotlight or singled out? Could you comment on that more broad concept from your point of view?
If I think you can further stereotype a group?
Yeah, the question was, or the concern that came up was, do we, in our efforts to combat discrimination and stereotypes, do we then create policies and programs that are a form of positive discrimination that put one group into a particular position or push them into an image and possibly disadvantage another group by doing it?
So kind of like affirmative action. And so any of you who are American or who've gone to school here know about affirmative action, and I mean, it kind of plays on both ends. You know, I remember going to law school and there were, 11% of the school body were non-white. And there were people that spoke about, oh, those guys are affirmative action students, right? But I think it's absolutely essential when you're trying to level playing fields to provide positive measures to deal with that, because it's not going to move on its own, right? You have to think about what can you put in place to address the disadvantage that's existed for so long. If you don't do that, you run the risk of just continuously having that excluded group at the bottom of the ladder. And so if you're not actively looking to include women, if you're not actively looking to include people with disabilities or Indigenous people, you're never going to raise raise the bar, if you want, for that. So, I mean, I think that positive measures are important. Positive measures are also recognized as remedies to discrimination. And will they come with stereotypes? They very well may. But I think it's about how you package them and the kind of messaging that comes around addressing the need to have positive measures to assist and facilitate the empowerment of disadvantaged groups.
So we need to have. We'll come to you in a second. So we need to have measures that do help combat discrimination, but we need to handle them in a sensitive and appropriate way that gets the messages through in a constructive manner. Sorry,
I'm sorry. I was wondering if I could add a piece to what Sean had said, because sometimes I feel like the positive measures are done on paper only as positive measures, right? So, for example, since we're talking about disability, you could say, give the example of India, there is by law a 3% quota, right? Seats reserved for persons with certain kinds of disabilities in public employment. But there's nothing which says that you have to make the workplace accessible. So which means that they get to say, we have this affirmative action policy. But it's not really... You know what I'm saying?
So you're speaking about the sort of tokenistic gestures where an organization does something to, as we say, tick the box, but they're not serious about it and they're not committed to actually changing the way the organization works and things to make it accessible. Is that?
And I think that happens a lot, especially with disability. So to Charlotte's point, I completely agree that you need positive measures. I just feel like in some countries, they just do it as, so obviously we have a policy that persons with disabilities get 3% of the seats or whatever. But if they can't get it with a seat, so I think we need to think about putting down a policy that can also actually keep benefits and benefits.
Okay. That might be a good note to wrap up on this. I wish we had a lot more time for this, but people only have one day for everything. Because this is something we could really probe into and develop some pretty good ideas if we had more time, but we'll have to move shortly to disaster risk management. So before we do that, I think you finished it on a very important note for us as we do later in the morning move into this. What do we need to do when we are working with clients, partners, our own organization, to create a culture and an attitude and a way of working that is inclusive, that does make the workplace and every place accessible. And disability is one area of accessibility, many others too. Accessible for any group that's not the group in the majority. It's often the case. So that might be a good note to finish there. I'm going to give you just a very short presentation to follow this on some of the social and neurological factors that have been found that affect the way we operate. Why we have the reactions we do to different groups of people and to people who are different from us. Why does that happen, and how do we become more aware of it? But just before I do that, any last word? Anyone want the last word?
Can I say something about the fear piece? Because I think it's a very real emotion, and I think that it happens to a lot of people. But I think recognizing it is really important, because that starts, I think it's important to recognize it, but then I think what's really important is to be able to have places where you can get information. Because once you're able to break down the fear factor, I think you often are moving in the right direction. But again, in some ways, that goes back to the whole unconscious bias piece, doesn't it?
We'll start to we'll have a look at that now. Okay, so that's okay. So just a quick talkie. I like this cartoon. Can you see it at the back? Oh, you'll love working here. Nobody treats you any differently just because of your age, race, or gender. I wonder why. Okay. What are the roots of our stereotypes and prejudices? Going back to deep inside ourselves, historically, it was a survival mechanism. Our ability to quickly and automatically categorize people was a basic quality of the human mind that was linked to our survival, how to distinguish friend from foe. So like, oh, there's a guy with a spear coming at me, I better do something about it. So there's that very ancient wiring that we've had to distinguish that which is different from us and to categorize it. It's just something we do. It has its upside. It's how we order our lives. It's how we keep it from being chaotic. So that we do like to put people and things in boxes. To a great degree, all of us like to and sometimes need to do that in order to work out how we're going to deal with the world. But the flip side of being able to organize our minds is that it is the foundation of bias, stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. So it's something that historically, genetically became programmed in us to help us, doesn't always help us. How do we learn it? Where does this come from? I won't go into all of the ins and outs of it, but basically, the basis of the prejudices, biases, things we form, happen through sort of complex psychological processes that begin with an attachment to a close circle of acquaintances. And what the psychologists call this is there are in-group, we have in-groups, and we have out-groups. What does that mean? We feel drawn to some people more than others, for one reason or another. It's to do with our life experience, our upbringing, our cultural experience, a whole myriad of factors in our lives that draw us to certain groups of people. We all tend to like, you notice, we all like some people more than others. Just generally, you meet some people and you feel like connect with that person better. There's lots of reasons for that. You have something in common, you don't connect because you have something in common. That's how you feel. We like to surround ourselves with people who are like us. And there is a very strong preference in amongst most peoples and societies to be surrounded by like-minded and organizations and teams, like-minded people. Years ago, in a lot of work on management, it was found that teams that lacked diversity even of personalities and skills were less effective teams, but that many managers would recruit in the image of themselves. And so that's some of where you see that, some of that sort of behavior reflected. It still happens. I remember we used to make jokes about an organization that I used to deal with that you could always predict in every area what sort of people they would have recruited and what gender they'd be, what nationality, blah, blah. It was bizarre. And the reality of our lives is that our in-group is always smaller than our out-group. So of course, there's a circle of people you're closer to, and there's all the circles outside of that. It's wired into us. It's in our brains to do this. Basically, what scientific research has found is that we use the same neuropathological processes when we think of ourselves and of the people in our in-group than we do with people that we think of as being outside of our in-group, as our out-group. So on a very deep level, not a conscious level, we tend to automatically feel a little more empathy for people who are a bit more like ourselves. And we tend to feel a little less empathy for people who are different to ourselves. And that's an everyday behavior that's been recorded in multiple studies. When we learn these, and often it starts right from our childhood, we start forming our in-groups and our out-groups from the time we're little children. So our parents have a big influence on that. The community we grow up in has a big influence on that. And then our experiences throughout our growing up in our lives have an influence on that. In-groups and out-groups can shift and change over time. but there are some core in-groups that you usually know. Those initial biases can often become reinforced by the strong desire we have to belong. So we want to conform with our in-group. There have been amazing studies that show that people will be given totally illogical, senseless information that is obviously wrong. And these scientific studies put the person in a room. So say you're at this table. You're not told what to respond, but everyone else is told to say something really ridiculous. And because you feel the need to belong, you start to repeat the ridiculous thing, even though you think this isn't true. And over time, if that keeps getting reinforced and reinforced, you start to go inside your brain and say, well, it must be true. So the truth changes the perception of what is real and what is accurate. So it's a kind of a peculiar thing we do. And when you see some videos of some of these experiments, it's just quite confronting, actually. Our culture, as I mentioned, and the dominant or majority group in a society is always going to be more in your face. The messages of what they value and of what they think is important are always going to be, are almost always going to be coming through the strongest. It's like the societal image of this group. If you're here and 5 out of 7 of you are the same in as a dominant group in your background and how you look and everything, these two people are going to feel a bit of pressure, whether it's direct or indirect, to behave a bit more like you. And then media portrayals. A really big issue that we have also in the modern era is media portrayals, stereotypes, and omissions. To give you an example of how that can reinforce negative images that may and build them that are out there. Do you guys remember the Quebec mosque massacre that happened in January?
Yeah.
The original media reports said that the perpetrator was a Moroccan Muslim, and the media went wild. And this went all over, and everyone, there was quite a high degree of willingness to believe this. And then a day later it comes out that this guy was one of the worshippers, and he was the first one to call in the emergency. That's who he was. But he got picked up and questioned by the police, and it wasn't until the Canadian Prime Minister the following day demanded the media retract this information that they did. But unfortunately, it's too late. It's already gone out, and bang, it's already reinforced that image among a percentage of the population of what a Moroccan Muslim is and does. So we have those sorts of issues. And this is just somebody's attempt to give a depiction of how we view our in-group and our out-group when it becomes a more pronounced thing. There are those non-filled, they're holier than thou attitudes. So what does this lead us to? It's what Charlotte was calling the unconscious bias, hidden bias. It's just the same thing. Research shows that even when we think that the biases and the stereotypes that we grew up with, that we've gotten rid of them, they still remain. Their socialization is such a powerful process. They remain embedded at a deeper level, at a level that we're not always aware of. And there's lots of examples of people who work in the area of dealing with discrimination, dealing with social inclusion, who have discovered their own hidden biases. And these are people who specialize in this, who do it for a living. There's a really famous doctor from the UK, a psychologist who's done a lot of research on this. And she discovered that she had an image of airline pilots as being older white males. And when she had to deal with female pilots of a different color or ethnicity, she freaked out. And this is somebody who's considered one of the world's leading experts in this area. And so, what hope do we have? And a growing number of studies are showing the most disturbing thing, that so what? So we have some hidden biases. Big deal. It is a big deal. I think the fact that every day that Charlotte comes into the office to work, she experiences something from the small to the big, these are all not positive reinforcements for a person. It makes it very difficult. So when this happens, you get this unconscious discriminatory behavior. That's what the video of the people who say shit to people with disabilities. These are all people who wanted to do the right thing, who wanted to be inclusive, who wanted to be friendly, and all of that. But it wasn't happening for them, was it? And that's a bit of this unconscious discriminatory behavior creeping through. And it affects a really wide range of our decisions and actions. And I'm just going to give an example here on racial bias, on what some of the research has shown. This is a plastic-looking women bias. So the research findings on racial bias, these ones have come out of more European, North American research, but you could apply it in different ways to different racial groups with each other. So this found that white people who were found to have greater levels of implicit stereotypes, these hidden biases, of black or gay people tended to be, when they did experiments, a little more unfriendly to them, a little less open, a little less friendly. Those who had a stronger hidden bias about race had more activity going on in a part of the brain that deals with your emotional learning when showing black faces than showing white faces in photos. So the brain, this part of the brain was reactive. And there's a very classic experiment that's been done over and over that showed that white interviewers, these ones have mostly been done here in the US, these ones, sat further away from black applicants than from white applicants, made more speech errors, they got nervous, and entered interviews 25% sooner. So what does that say about the chances of that black person being chosen for the job compared to somebody the white person? It shows you why, in a lot of cases, you've got groups of people who keep not getting picked or promoted. So it's I find that research. I found that research when I first came across it quite confronting. Do you? It's pretty yuck. And this is from people who are not consciously prejudiced. These are people often who think they are not, which most of us do. Some of them. When taken to the societal level, this research showed that individuals, researchers found individuals of the same race or ethnicity, even in the same family, who have lighter skin, appear to have better outcomes in life. Better chances of getting married, especially women, better chances in the labor force. That's the findings of the research. People of non-Anglo backgrounds, this same woman is afraid of pilots who aren't white and male and older. She's done heaps of research on business organizations and how they react to what their perceptions are of the skills and the abilities of the people in their organization. And they consistently rated, no matter what the background of the person was. So the interviewees have been black, white, they've been Asian, they've been multiple ethnicities, they've crossed the spectrum, and inevitably, the people of non-Anglo backgrounds were getting rated even by themselves lower in certain business skills in a number of major organizations that have anti-discrimination policies. So it's an issue. Of course, what does this mean? This affects people, no matter what your status or accomplishments are. You could be, there's one woman whose story I remember. She was the CEO of a major corporation, but consistently had to deal with this kind of unconscious bias on a gender basis, having to fight for her space in meetings, having people question the basis of her promotions, and so on and so forth. And it was wearing her down. It really was hard to both do your job and prove yourself, to be competent in what you do and make your way in the world, and then have to, on top of that, deal with all this crap being thrown at you. Making you question your own competency. This is what can happen. Hidden bias tests with over 50 million people since 2013 have found on the gender side 80% of both men and women, no matter what their backgrounds and what types of jobs they do, and from multiple cultures, again, multiple countries, still tend to associate careers with men and homes with women when these tests are done. So kind of interesting. So the message here from this research is exactly what Charlotte was saying, is that we have to recognize we all have hidden biases. There's a combination of neurological and social factors that have affected us over the years, that make us who we are, that create those biases, stereotypes, and prejudices. We all have them in some form or another, and it may be about different people or different things for different individuals, but it's there. What can we do about it so that we're not sitting in an interview panel and going 2 feet away from Tafadzwa or something because he's black and I'm white, and say, well, I had enough of that interview, time for you to go, so that you're not having that happen. It's making a conscious effort to be aware we have these. It's exactly what you said, Charlotte, to acknowledge we all have hidden bias, and that we all need to make an effort to identify what our own hidden biases are, and to monitor ourselves. But is that behavior creeping in that actually sort of undermines other people who are a bit different to us? If you're interested in doing this yourself and finding out more about what might be your own hidden biases, there's a very famous set of very credible tests on this website on hidden bias, and it covers all sorts of things: gender, race, sexual orientation, countries. I did one that I found quite fun about how did I feel about Australia compared to the United States. So there's just heaps of subjects that you can look at and test yourself. And each individual test takes about 10 to 15 minutes. The usual reaction of a number of people when they do this is the first few they do, they don't believe the results. They think it's generally true, but not for me. And then you get more comfortable with acknowledging your own biases. And this is like what Charlotte was saying about acknowledging fear. It's also acknowledging that we all have them, and we have to manage them. It has a lot of implications for any of the work. It has implications for our whole lives, but it has a lot of implications for the work that you're doing with client governance, where you may not even be aware that you're slightly favoring towards one type of group of people you're dealing with, and not necessarily openly discriminating another group, but less concerned about them. We've got so much to deal with in this program. We've got so many issues. This is really important, I get you, but it's not as important, so we'll look at it later. That's where sometimes this leads to groups being bypassed, marginalized, tokenized in programming. The other thing you can do that has been discovered in research is that it's not good enough to simply recruit more people from a particular group. I'll use the workplace example into the workplace without the proper kind of support, or your attempt to be inclusive may not succeed. This is to give you an example from the disaster world. If we have if we want to make district disaster risk management councils, and we proactively want to recruit a balance of women, people with disabilities, etc., if we just randomly pull out women and say you have a quota, and throw them into that environment, you could possibly do them a disservice, because what they need is they have been socialized to not speak out, to be the group that is not so vocal and that doesn't have its needs acknowledged as much as other groups. So what we've had to do in situations like this is to identify women, or work with women, identify them, or other groups, and give them training and skill them up to get the confidence and the skills to be able to participate equally in that district council. So you do need to have proactive measures to recruit. And quotas and targets are good. Don't get me wrong on that. But if you do that by itself, it's ignoring that there's a reason why these people have been left out, and then you have to change the environment and the enabling environment for them to participate fully and equally. So that's what's been learned, is that it's got to be a structured environment that promotes diverse inputs. So the flip side of training and supporting the group you're trying to bring in, say, to a decision-making structure, the flip side is that the people who run that decision-making structure also need to be worked with to help them develop better understanding and more positive attitudes towards the group you're trying to bring in the groups. So it's about that whole combination of factors coming together. I think this is a no-brainer, and I just mentioned it in terms of programming. Our biases and discrimination creep in to social exclusion and marginalization. It becomes embedded in our systems and procedures, like the cartoon where it was all the white guys in the gray suits. We end up inadvertently, without realizing it, creating mirror images of ourselves, whoever's the dominant group, in our systems and our institutions. And the economic costs and consequences are high, very high. And bottom line too, human dignity matters. The social inclusion matters framework and the studies that underpinned it, for example, found that there were marginalized women in India, very poor women who were not using health services, and everyone thought, oh, it's because they're too far, it's because they can't get the people. It was because it turned out that the women felt they weren't being treated with dignity. They were from a minority group, and they weren't using those services because they felt a lack of dignity. So it's important how we treat people. And there's a few key resources you can look at that go not into the personal psychology, but into the consequences in depth. But after our break, we'll get Charlotte to actually give a presentation on this one, on inclusion matters, and how the bank is tackling this and how it sees this in its programs and operations and policies. Any comments, questions, suggestions before we break for coffee? What's that called?
Oh, you did it?
So, personal bias at a personal level, so we're going to get into and start applying that in the areas that we work. So we're going to have an innovation panel discussion. So if I could ask people just to take like 10-minute coffee break and come back so that we can start right at 11.
So,
that'd be great. Thanks.
And
then I've got a new word, appropriation.
Like a tiny list of
And it's so fun because that's so like, man, I'll be appropriated. So if you have mansplaining and then you have appropriating, it's two different. And then you have man-interrupting. Unnecessary interruption of a woman by a man. Man-interrupting, mansplaining, is up there. And is that the worst example of the group? No, man-interrupting was rabbits, or I think
I'm a legislator.
It was like the worst example ever.
How did you even arrive at that?
Appropriate? I found that. It was actually by coincidence. It was like a Facebook. What?
Do you have a charger?
Charger for phone? Yeah, I do. You need it? Yeah, sure. So it was by coincidence. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
And maybe it's probably because, your Facebook feed, like I've been looking into all this things lately. Maybe they just linked me to that because,
Like
What you call it?
really into this.
She's really into all this appropriating stuff.
That's okay. Where am I going to go?
It's pretty funny though. Bro,
You don't have slides, right?
and doesn't work. Yeah, no, it's not your charge. I think the socket is not.
But that's not until a little bit later, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, this is like a short presentation, then we'll get into the discussion with you and what
Okay, terrific.
I'm so going to take that test.
Going on the biases.
Yeah.
Sure, very interesting.
You're taking it now, yeah.
So you were able to get
I did it yesterday.
thinking that
Yesterday I had to get an Uber. And I was like, you're paying for it this time, buddy. It's coming out of your pay. It's the first thing.
Poor guy, man. You know, you're sleeping that. It's really amazing when you're on. Got me thinking.
I mean, I don't think, like, I have a sister who's really deaf, and she's not completely deaf, but I never thought of that I had a person that has a disability. It's like you normally. But the question I wanted to ask is, like, when we talk about it'd be interesting to ask you this. Well, we may have talked about this, you and I. Like, whose responsibility is it? Like, because when I get, like, I remember when Ronan was little, he's obviously a baby, right? And people would get uncomfortable around him. And particularly white people, because they would say, "Oh, is he adopted?" And I would get upset and be like, so to make them uncomfortable. But then I think when we talk about how to confront it constructively, I guess I shouldn't do that. Like, whose responsibility? Oh, with the guy sitting at you. Exactly.
Right? But in this way, like, I just and it was kind of like quiet, right?
Yeah.
So that was my way of turning it. But I mean, I think it's a very case to case.
Yeah.
For me, it depends on the context. And if I thought back on all the questions that I experienced, I would be
that's what I'm saying.
So some of them it's just like water off the top.
And the thing is, it's always, this is what I tell Ronan, like when he was like being teased Oreos. I was like, it's always about the other person, it's not about you, right? So whatever, like, say I'm familiar with people with certain disabilities, but, and I know blind people, but like I don't know, I just have I always feel like being blind.
Yeah.
Like I'm always like,
Okay. No sabe mucho.
Like, and that's a fun insight. And usually, so a lot of times they do.
Estamos poniendo.
I was just like, I don't know what to do with this guy. Like, just, And then he asked after the meeting, he was like, "Go somewhere and have a drink." And I was like, "Oh, exactly. What am I gonna do?" I could hardly, I was having a hard time being in a meeting, just, because I felt like that's not the way you should be speaking. Not that I felt it was his problem, but I was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He has a degree from Oxford, and he's
Yeah.
just like sticking.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
This is who I am.
you know, and
Okay. Okay, then I can put it.
Red Rhino all over the place. And I was like,
I'll get you one.
yeah. Right? And he
I can put
obviously
it in
is
the
I'll just
way
I'll
of
have Michelle.
rejecting it, right? And then pushing it away.
By ignoring it, no? Or
Okay, in
And so
the,
I had to
Because you know then you can
well,
distribute it as well.
yes, I can maybe provide stop by. And are you going back to the office today?
Maybe around lunch.
Okay, then you bring it in.
That's why I don't believe.
Exactly.
Oh, I totally don't believe that. Yeah.
They're even there.
But they're not enough.
Able to
This is for.
Yeah.
and sometimes it's weird.
Yeah, and sometimes like the positive ones even you don't know how to deal with. Like that somebody said, oh, when they see a biracial couple, say, oh, you're so cute. We get that. And we are a good-looking couple, I gotta say, but you know, we get that all the time. Or people say, oh, I think biracial couples make the most beautiful children or something. And I'm like, thank you. Like I don't know what to do with that.
Yes, because people would say to my parents, why didn't you tell me the story? Like, what
Tell
we
your
felt.
story.
Yeah, because
I can't sit with this. Whose is this?
Like we fell in love. Like, is that the story? Like, what's the story? Like,
We met at Safeway. Like I don't know.
You know, and it's also,
Someone took my pen.
story is, you know, I mean,
Someone took my pen.
you know, it's every corner.
I went through, I was like, God,
Like what they say.
Oh,
Yeah. Where are you really from?
Where you really from?
Yeah. It's like you're
Where
not-
you from?
Where you from? The where's you from?
Wow.
Is the big thing.
someone just walked away with my pen.
And you, I mean, you know that.
Yeah.
It was my favorite pen.
Where you say where you're from and they don't know.
Oh no, she has it. See, I know why. It says bank corporate security. I got this at the Safe Trading.
Yeah, you
You
do.
might know this, but she does. So she doesn't need it.
I just see American.
No. So she reads Manhattan and she automatically realizes that I have an accent. So I'm in that category of.
that's your one.
You see?
You stole my.
You were trying to steal my pen. And then also your chair.
And my chair.
But I don't feel like that's something. Like I do that all. Like I was taking a cab to the airport, and the dude was obviously not American or not originally American. I was like, "Where are you from?" And he was like, "Oh, Boston." I'm like, "No, but like you know, I hear
Where
your
you from?
accent." And he's like, "Oh, I'm from Haiti." You know, and it was because I wanted to talk about you know.
Yeah,
I thought it was
do
more
that
interesting
too.
talking about Haiti than Boston.
Exactly.
So I do that too, but I mean, when I think it depends on the context, again, right? I mean, yeah, and I think it depends on the context. I mean, if you're doing it to have a chat,
Is
with
it like
text,
your intent? It's like, can you tell people's intent? I guess is
I
that
think
what
it is
issue
about what the intention is, right? If you're trying to figure out and put, you're not trying to put the guy in a box, right? You're trying to have a conversation with him,
Yeah.
about something in somewhere that where he comes from. Whereas if you're saying where you from is like, yeah, you're American, but you're not. You're American, like. You know.
Well, and I guess, and he may not know that, right? He might be thinking, oh, does she think I'm, I don't know,
But I think that also
terrorist
depends
or-
on your context and how you interpret it, right? Because I mean, if someone asked me, where do you live? I would say DC, but they were like, well, yeah, but where are you from? I was like, oh, I'm from Denmark. I mean, it wouldn't bother me, right?
Right, but because your identity
Exactly,
is Danish, right?
exactly. So it also depends on your context, how you then sort of react to that question, right?
But if somebody's asking you where are you from to other you, right, to take you out of the category of where they see themselves, then there's their issue. And you're not doing that to the taxi driver. You're not othering him.
But
you're just engaging.
You didn't think that that person was just trying to get to know you better?
No.
No, you could.
You get vibes, I guess.
No.
But it's that classic thing about identity, right?
Yeah.
Here I'll say, I'm from Pakistan. In Pakistan, I'll say I'm from this part of Pakistan. In that part of Pakistan, I'll say this is my village,
But it's also an American thing to some extent, right? Because there are a lot of people who have a much more, a more layered identity in the U.S. than I, for instance, from Denmark. If I'm Danish, I'm Danish. I mean, there's not a lot more to it, right? But if someone is American, they can identify themselves as Italian American, right?
Yeah,
Irish
but there's a
American.
difference. So, for instance, I'm European-derived American. Nobody ever asks me where you're from. No other American ever asks me where. Ever asked me where you're from.
Right.
But my friends who are people of color, either African American, Asians, Latinos, they might be in the they may be in the family in the country as long as my family's been here. They're as American as I am. But when they introduce themselves to new people, they often get asked the question by the Americans, "Oh, where are you from?" No, I mean, where are you really from?
Okay, interesting.
But I used to, like, growing up in New York, they would be like, "Oh, I would say I'm Irish," even though I'm like Brooklyn Irish. We've been here for generations, but I think I like.
Well, New York's also a special place.
Yeah, maybe. It's like people identified as more of Italian American.
Yeah,
We wouldn't say the American part. We just say, "Oh, I'm Irish." I'm
No, I
Italian.
mean, once you start talking to somebody, people start delving into, well, why do you have that Spanish last name, but you don't look Latino?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, which is different. That's fine.
It is different. Yeah.
But it's not the same phenomenon in the U.S. context of asking a person of color, "No, where are you really from?"
Yeah, so that is very much the difference, right? Because my dad's white, nobody would ever say to him, "Where are you from?"
No, I understand.
But they'll say it to me immediately.
But it's obviously, I mean, how it's said, right? Where you're really from, but that's just rude. No, that's rude. I mean, that's like, what do you mean by that? I mean, there's a lot of implicitly said in that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That I told Nick, I mean, obviously things could be said in different ways, for sure. And that obviously helps you how you interpret it. Yeah.
And it often is subconscious. It comes automatically.
Yeah.
Right? They don't think that, oh, maybe this is a weird question. Or why am I asking that question?
Yeah, I know. I've seen it before. It's very nice. We're continuing all the discussions.
Good. Oh, look, I wish we could do this like a 2 or 3 day course. Yes.
Yeah.
It would be so good to unpack all of this before moving on to the other stuff. And I feel like I've taken more time than
What's your view on this? When you were saying confront, I was asking Charlotte, like, whose responsibility is it? Because, like, I was telling her, when I get questions, when Rhoda was little, carrying around an obviously black baby, white people would be like, "Oh, you adopted? Where did you adopt from?" And, like, assuming, I would get upset and say something really rude, like, "No, to make them really upset. To make them as uncomfortable as they make me, right? But then I think that's not constructive.
Margaret, I have a really funny story. I have a classmate whose his mother is German, father is Bengali from India, and so he looks like a mix of both his mother and father. And so they were at the immigration in Germany at the airport, and so the immigration official said, "So, where's your adopted son? Where's his?" And she's like, "Excuse me, I distinctly remember my labor pains."
That's a nicer way to say it.
What did you say?
So you could say that. I distinctly remember my labor.
Because I want them to feel uncomfortable too. But that's But then
like,
that could give them a
real.
negative experience, and then they
No, but maybe there's also something to shock and awe. No.
Yeah, I guess.
This is a conversation I think we should continue over lunch, and we'll work out whether Margaret should continue to do what she does. So we might have a group vote on it and a group consensus later today on what Margaret should do. For now, I'm running a bit behind, so I'm going to keep moving things along. And the next thing is, as was said by Margaret, we're going to have Charlotte presenting the Inclusion Matters framework for us of the World Bank. And that will be followed by some comments on the issue from Maria Beatriz, who's back there, who's just joined us, if you didn't know her or notice her, who is the lead social development specialist, heavily involved in all inclusion matters. And Clifton.
Really? Where?
Cliff is going to tell us a bit about SOGI stuff.
This is the right.
Yes, this is it. Yeah, I got it.
Oh, I got a sticker.
Great. So, so I think that was a really rich earlier session, and I know we all kind of
Did you come together?
huddled in at our table.
We came together.
But now we want to move from kind of the personal to what this means for our own work and look at kind of the theoretical underpinnings of social inclusion. And it's really fascinating because social inclusion is one of those terms that means different things to so many different people. I mean, I bet you we could go around the table and everybody would come up with some kind of notion of what social inclusion looks like. And so it was really refreshing that the bank, 2-3 years ago, took on a flagship study to look at social inclusion, and there are copies of the report on the side wall there. But I think it was important because what it did was to really go through all the really good research and pull out some very salient concepts and help us think through what social inclusion means. So, in terms of the report, it posits that social inclusion is the process of improving terms for individuals and groups to take part in society. I mean, that doesn't sound like rocket science. I mean, yes, of course it does. But I think what's important is that it talks about improving ability, improving opportunity, and that goes back to our earlier discussion. So that may mean, in some instances, looking at positive measures, right? Because improving ability and opportunity often means that you have to have remedial steps to get to that leveling playing field. So that's important. I think a great introduction by way of this report was that it talked about the dignity of people. And it doesn't matter where you go, if you talk to communities that are marginalized, and it doesn't matter what the marginalizing factor is, whether it's their sexuality or their disability or their ethnicity, dignity is fundamental. Dignity is fundamental to everybody, right? And so this for me was an important shift. It was an important shift for the bank to start talking about dignity as a central tenet of social inclusion. And then I think the other important piece is to look at what is the disadvantage that arises based on that person's identity, and we've talked a bit about that this morning. And so and that can vary dramatically from identity to identity. And then how do those disadvantages play out in terms of how you engage in society? And that too is something we started to talk about earlier on. Sorry. So, still on the notion of what is social inclusion, as we said earlier on, it's about a process where certain individuals and groups are excluded, are pushed out, are relegated, and are on the margins or the fringes of society. And this almost always means that they are prevented, and in some instances prohibited. I mean, there's the prevention piece, but in some instances, if you think about particular identities, people are prohibited from participating in economic, in social, and in political life. And we may want to think a bit about this later on. And I think that there are categories there are types of identities, or there are identities where prohibition is really real. So I'm sure people talk about the LGBTI community, where you still have in many countries, an entire identity is criminalized, right? If you think about the Rohingya people as a group of people who also are prohibited from engaging in many of the social and economic factors in particular countries, and you know, this goes on and on and on. But it's the fact they're being excluded because of their identity, and that's the important piece. And then I think the moving it from the personal to kind of the group piece is to look at how this happens systematically, right? So remember I was saying, you know, I feel as if I experience microaggressions every day because of my disability. Now, if that wasn't an experience experienced by most other people with disabilities, it would be kind of my issue, right? But once it becomes a systematic, this is something that you experience because you are part of this group, it's not a singular incident, right? So the systematic exclusion, the systematic being blocked out of whatever it is because of the person's identity. And that may result in the denial of rights. It may manifest itself in the denial of opportunities, of equal opportunities, or no opportunities whatsoever. And often it results in resources being less available to those groups that are systematically excluded and denied. And we can think about this in terms of almost every single sector of the bank's work, and certainly in terms of most services. So think about housing. Most of us live in DC or in the DMV. You can drive through the city and you automatically can see how people are excluded, how different groups are excluded. If you drive into the Southeast, you recognize that it's mainly African American. You drive into certain, so even in a city like DC, housing is very segregated, if we're being honest. And that has a bearing on employment. It certainly has a bearing on education. So if you go to the schools, you're back to the schools, you go to the schools which are around where you live. If you live in a particular area, your kids are going to go to those schools. So that's another way of, you have access, but it's marginal access. So it's not like the kids are not going to school. They're going to school. But the schools that they're going to are very often substandard and less resource schools. There's also the issue of civic engagement, democratic participation, and due process. And all of these are really important when we think about discrimination of marginalized groups. So I've begun to talk a bit, and we certainly spoke about it this morning, but you know, it's important when we think about our programmatic work to think about who is excluded. And I think this is where thinking about social inclusion should start. You need to mentally say to yourself, who am I excluding, right? That is a fundamental question when you start to design any kind of project, when you start any kind of analytical work. You know, put a big signpost on the side of your desk and have that remind you to ask yourself that question, who am I excluding rather. But also, never be comfortable in your space around who you think you've included, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, for somebody who works primarily on disability, I know the lay of the land. I know my constituency. I can navigate and feel my way through. But they're groups or identities that I feel less comfortable thinking through. And because I don't understand them, because I don't have the knowledge to help me think through what this means, right? But I think what's important to address social inclusion is to flag it, right? To have that red flag that says, oh, wait a second. You need to think about this more broadly. And I think when you start doing that, it becomes easier to think about other groups. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think once you start wrapping your head around how do you include sexual orientation, then your mind says, well, I'm including LGBTI folk, but, maybe there are LGBTI folk who have disabilities. How do I include them? It helps you think more, it stretches your mind to think about intersectionality a lot more, and to help you to really recognize that societies are very diverse and that we all have multiple identities. And so, I have super multiple identities, but that's okay. But I think it's just important that we think about the alienation and disenfranchisement. I can't say that word. Disenfranchisement, and how that's connected to discrimination. And again, thinking about discrimination, socioeconomic discrimination, discrimination on the basis of socioeconomic status. So the poor, we all talk about the poor, right? I think we have to ask ourselves constantly, who are they? I think we have this tendency to throw around these labels, right? And kind of miraculously assume that that will unpack itself. But if you're talking about the poor, I think it's really important to start really interrogating who they are, where they are, and then perhaps most importantly, from my view, why is it that they're poor? Because that often speaks to the systemic issues that excludes them. I think it's also really important that we recognize that social exclusion is rooted in intangible social norms. So we know that, right? And beliefs and stereotypes, and we talked a bit about that in the morning. But it's also very much part of our unconscious bias. I think some of the ingrained stereotypes that we have are, as noted on the screen, Roma people are lazy. When I lived in Europe, the thing was Roma people are thieves. So people, create these labels and stereotypes about communities and about groups, which makes it very difficult for people then to be part of what's considered a normalized society. So, social inclusion and inequality, we know that socially marginalized groups tend to have less power because they're not they're not part of decision making. They often don't have the opportunity to vote, and basically they are excluded from any kind of political structures and decision-making bodies, and so that keeps them outside of the realm of any kind of power. I think the other important factor here is that the constant negation of a group often results in low aspirations. Right, and we see that internalized. People talk about internalized racism, all sort of kind of internal. People begin to accept their fate, if you want. Right, you've been told so many times that you're not worthy, you can't do this. People internalize that, and so low aspirations can become an issue because people don't feel that they can break through those stereotypes. I'm going to move on a bit to the poverty piece because I think this is an important one. I think the research shows us that there is definitely an overrepresentation of excluded groups among those who are poor, right? And that's, whether it's female-headed households, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's people from the LGBTI community, Indigenous people, you fill in the blank. I mean, the research is out there, and it really points to that. So my proposition is that if we are serious about really reaching the two goals, we need to really think about, A, why are they overrepresented in these amongst the poor, and really begin to unpack the how exclusion intersects with poverty, because I think that that's something we don't do enough of. But I think it's also useful to note that social exclusion can also happen to some groups that may not necessarily be poor. Okay? So Cliff may talk about this a bit, but I think, increasingly we're seeing within the LGBTI community higher incomes, right? That does not mean that people don't experience discrimination, right? So even though you may not live in poverty, often the common experience that you have as a person who comes from a particular grouping is that of discrimination. So what should we do? The important thing is to ask why. Why are certain groups overrepresented and have worse human development outcomes? That's kind of, for me, one of the key things we need to be thinking about when we think about operationalizing social inclusion. We also need to ask, why do some groups, why do some people lack access to education? And even when they do receive education, the quality of the education is less. Why do certain groups and certain communities have worse health outcomes than others? I mean, it's about teasing out these issues and not just accepting that, this is the way it is. It's about really digging in and finding out what the causes are. So I think the other important piece to think about when we talk about inclusion is to talk about what are we trying to include people into. Right? So it's not just, we're not just doing social inclusion because it's a good thing, right? I mean, it is a good thing. But it's about including people into markets. It's about including people into services. It's about including and ensuring that people are part of public spaces. If we remember the video that we watched earlier on this morning about being Afro-Peruvian and being invisible, I would imagine that spaces is a place where it must be quite uncomfortable, right? So I think it's really important to think about these three pieces. And that's very well projected in the social inclusion framework that talks about markets, which we've spoken about before, so land, housing, labor, and access to credit. And then services, social protection. Hero, you asked about that this morning. Electricity, transportation, education, health, water is important. And then spaces, I talked about kind of the public spaces, but there's the political space that's important. There's the physical or the built environment. There's the cultural space. There's the social space. And so if you think about this framework, it's important to think about what this means for enhancing ability, providing opportunities, and really insisting on dignity. And so I think I'll stop here and hand over back to Cynthia.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. We'll just have Maria Beatriz next, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you so much, and so sorry, I don't know if you can stay for questions because I have something else at 11:30, but delighted to be here, and for those of you who will be taking also the training on gender, I'll be there tomorrow as well, and really, really happy that we're having this joint session with DRM colleagues. I think this is very important. Now, I just wanted to mention a little bit, complementing Charlotte's great presentation about the World Bank's framework for social inclusion. How are we applying it to our work, and what has happened after the Inclusion Matters report was published? And I think also this will lead very much to what Cliff wants to share with us about one specific area that is a frontier area for us, which is the area of sexual orientation and gender identity, and how do we integrate it into our work. So the main hook or entry point for social inclusion in Japan is the twin goals, particularly the second goal, which is the shared prosperity goal. Very explicitly says how do you achieve shared prosperity is through social inclusion. And it's mentioned very, very specifically with this definition. So by this inclusion in market, services, and spaces. So not only is it enough for us to reduce poverty, which is pretty much traditionally how we have worked at the bank, and to also essentially target the poor in our interventions. That's all good and fine. But the twin goals is a bit more ambitious. It says we also have a goal that is about process and about a continuum of continuously trying to share prosperity among not just the poor, but the bottom 40%, which may be poor or not. But often, the composition of this group obeys to social categorization, social exclusion, social inclusion, all of the issues that we have been discussing, and identity. So that's a little bit why, if you wish, it's like taking our traditional poverty approach one step further, as Charlotte has been saying, wondering about why are people poor, who are they poor, and are there any systematic social categories or groupings that are making it more difficult for us to reduce poverty and share prosperity in a dynamic sense. So that's a little bit, the hook. In terms of analytical work, there have been a lot of regional and country reports that have been using this framework. We also have 3 programs in Southeast Asia, started by Maitreyi Das, the co-author of the report, that are on gender and social inclusion that do both analytical work and also advise operations. We also have a couple of reports coming out in Africa region. And also we have a flagship report coming out in LAC about indigenous. We had one on indigenous peoples, and we have another one coming up on Afro-descendants, very specifically. So you will see this approach more and more in terms of analytical work that poverty, social protection, social development, a lot of colleagues are doing. The challenge remains, I think, from the analytical perspective, how to apply this to PDNA and how to include gender, disability, SOGI, Afro-descendants, IP peoples in the post-disaster needs analysis. This is a challenge. I mean, I was, at some point, I worked in Haiti right after the earthquake, and the PDNA was done, of course, in an incredible rush. You're very familiar with this. It's your sector. And very little attention was paid to these issues, and this is something that people who authored the report can tell. I mean, it was a fantastic PDNA from many points of view, but really not so much on the gender or an inclusion exclusion entry point. So this is, I think, an exercise that we need to do more and more, because then what happens is, for instance, the reason why I work in Haiti is because ex post, once we were working in Haiti, once the housing project and most of the reconstruction projects went to the board and passed, I was called in a sort of like emergency mode to put together a trust fund because there was all this sexual violence in the camps. And even though we were not directly providing assistance and relief in the camps, our housing projects was supposed to work with that population very, very specifically. So in a rush, we had to set up a trust fund and a facility to work on gender-based violence in the camps, not being present there, without the opportunity of having the analysis, without having the opportunity of influencing what was done in the camps where people were brought there and so forth. So we did, I think, a very good job, but it's a lot better, I think, if you can plan, a little bit for these things. And for instance, gender-based violence is one of the things that often happens because of social norms, because of the systematic exclusion of women or women's issues or these issues into planning, and it's a classic example. So that's from an analytical perspective how the framework has been applied and can be applied. And then operationally, we do have operations that have in their diagnosis a strong consideration of these issues. Then there are actions that are planned, whether in a component or several components, to tackle, particularly include a group or to offer an intervention for a systematically excluded groups, and these are monitored through MIE. So that consistency between the diagnosis, the actions of the MIE is very important. Sometimes also what we have seen operationally is an operation that is classic, that is, let's say, is a roads project or it's a housing project. And then in the diagnosis, it identifies some excluded groups based on identity and poverty combined. Then the action is a typical action. It's just, it doesn't particularly target these groups or tailor the intervention to this group. But then it has indicators that are disaggregated by gender or disability or identity to at least monitor the impact. Is it true, this thing that we often say, that our intervention is universal, and the services we're providing are universal, and we're reaching everybody? And by monitoring that, there is a lot that you can do throughout the project cycle. So at the very least, I think including indicators that are disaggregated is very important. And having some diagnosis, so you can be aware, even if you're not willing or the government is not willing or the resources are constrained and you cannot tailor your interventions or your design. If you, your team, and government are aware of the issues, and then you have indicators that are disaggregated, and you can see whether the intervention actually is reaching everybody or is as universal as we thought, that is a great first step and really helps build the evidence and goes forward. Of course, in addition, it's a lot better also if one can think about specific actions to work with some groups that you fear or your diagnosis tells you that are not going to be benefiting so much from the project. That would be even better. You can have a component, or immediately can think about a trust fund that can be added, and definitely that's also often how we see this operationally working. We have done a lot of portfolio reviews. We can offer this also as well, not just the conceptual part, but also examples of good practices on social inclusion in projects, and we're happy to provide them.
Thanks, Maria Beatrice. Last but not least.
Sure. That was me. But, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm not going to walk around because I sprained my ankle this past week, so it's harder for me to move around. So I know exactly how you feel, Charlotte.
I told you.
Now you can never say. Now you can never say I didn't say anything stupid to you about disability. So start off. Who in the room has a sexual orientation? You raise your hand. And who has a gender identity? So all of us have both a sexual orientation and a gender identity. They're not the same thing, right? But some of us have a sexual or identity or a sexual orientation or gender identity that's not the same as most people. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about LGBTI people, lesbian, gay, bisexual men and women, trans men, trans women, intersex people, which is the medical term for hermaphrodite, in case that helps you place what the intersex is. It's about physical characteristics that you're born with. And the exclusion is based on that. The challenge is that, so essentially, like all the other issues we're talking about, difference is the challenge for people who have diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, or minority sexual orientations and gender identities. So let's drill down a little bit. Some of us who are a sexual or gender minority, and that's what we talk about in the shorthand, can hide, right? We don't have to have folks know that we actually fall into that category. Some of us cannot hide, and you can imagine who those people are out in the world. They often transgender people cannot hide. Or somebody, a boy or a girl, a man or a woman, who doesn't conform to gender expectations of behavior or appearance. It doesn't have to be about transgenderism. It's about a woman acting too much like a man, too butch, a man who acts too much like a woman. He's too feminine. And so those people can't hide in our community. And so this is, for people who can't hide, exclusion, discrimination, too often violence is a regular occurrence in their lives. For those who can hide, maybe that's not a regular occurrence in their life, the actual exclusion, the violence, or the discrimination, but all of this has psychological impacts because they're still hearing what people are saying about them at the end of the day, or doing to people like them in the community. And so these are things that we need to keep in mind. And let's not forget that when it comes to these issues, gender is a critical component. Because at the end of the day, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the most important things. At the end of the day, the reason we have exclusion is because of the attitudes of men towards women that see them as weaker and less. And so therefore, if a man is acting like a woman, he's weaker and he's less. And if two men are having sex together, clearly one of them must be acting like a woman. That's sort of the underlying thinking that goes through all of this. And so gender remains important. And a woman who acts like a man is just as importantly transcending the expectations, the boundaries we put around that woman. And so gender is very, very important, even if it's not specifically about gender identity, but about sexual orientation. And I think the three areas of work that we deal with in development, that you all deal with within the bank, that really are important, they're not the only ones, but I'm going to flag them as critically important, are education, economic opportunities, and violence, which I've mentioned before. So in education, the discrimination happens in the school setting from fellow students, it happens from teachers, and it happens from administrations. It can be a combination or one or the other of those, depending on one's context. And it leads to people dropping out of school. We know we've been able to collect the data that LGBTI identified people have higher rates of dropout than other students, non-LGBTI. If they stay in school, all of this creates psychological barriers to their effective learning. And we know that then lends itself to fewer opportunities that tie to economic opportunities, right? In the workplace, what we see are two things. One is occupational segregation. So my own experience, I lived in Asia for 10 years working for development agencies. When you're in Bangkok, if you're in Thailand, any public bathroom you go in, the cleaner is a transgender woman. Why is that? Because she can only get that job unless she's willing to sell sex because of how she looks. And so that's occupational segregation. It's one example. Different contexts offer different examples of occupational segregation. If you get into what we think of as the normal workplace, and you either self-identify once you're there or somebody simply identifies you for some reason, we know that people often face discrimination, non-job promotion. They face harassment in the workplace. They feel completely uncomfortable because of these things, and they either leave the workplace or they stay and they don't get promoted, and that limits their ability to support themselves and their families and economic opportunities. And we believe that once we have data, we'll be able to draw the dotted line and show that has an impact on GDP, it has an impact on the Human Development Index. And then on violence, it's all about family-induced violence, community-induced violence, and or state-induced violence. The most egregious example of state in the news recently, what's going on in Russia in the province of Chechnya, and targeting gay men for torture and murder. And that's state-induced. Let's not mistake that. As well as family-induced, because when the state has sent them back to their families, those that survived the torture, the families told them they should kill them, like an honor killing. And they have done that in some cases. So those are the different levels of violence that people of minority sexual and gender identity face, and that we need to keep in mind. And we all have biases, just as you noted, even if they're unconscious biases. And this is actually even true among people who, like me, I'm a gay man. It's true of us as well. We have homophobia among transgender people, and we have transphobia among gay and lesbian people as well. So the bias issue is one that we as humans all share together, even on this issue. And so at the end of the day, it really is, how do we address that? It really is about the things that you talked about, Charlotte, what you raised this morning. Dignity matters. Social inclusion matters. This is exactly what we've been saying, and we know. And the last thing I'll lead us to is the positive measures that we can take to address inclusion through policies and programs. Or I should say, positive measures, we can take positive measures to address this through policy and programs. And this can only address exclusion of self-identified LGBTI people. Because at the end of the day, in terms of measuring something in this area and doing something about it, it has to rely on the individual saying, that's me, and this is what I'm experiencing. If somebody is hidden and they're not actually self-identifying in that way, we're not going to be able to design programs that address their needs. That said, our approaches and our attitudes can actually also help those folks who are not willing to self-identify. And so we need to keep that in mind as well in terms of how we do our work. Where is this important? Cities. LGBT people historically migrate to cities because it gets them away from uncomfortable situations they're in, either family or community, and they're going to places where they can find community and where they can either hide or find safety. So cities are really critically important, and I'm going to give you one data point just to flag that. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sao Paulo University of Sao Paulo, has really good data on Sao Paulo in the last few years on LGBTI identified people. And they found that in that huge metropolis, almost 17% of the population of adults, men and women, identify as either gay, lesbian, or bi, man or woman. Almost 17%. That's not including whatever percentage it would be if we're able to get the data on trans women. And so these are significant percentages. And so this is absolutely an issue of urban agendas. And the last thing I'll say is poverty brings pronounced vulnerability, including for LGBTI people. A stereotype is that gay people are rich. This is not an issue for them. But in fact, we know from the data where we've been able to get it that LGBTI self-identified people in the client countries of the World Bank are overrepresented in the bottom 40%. For those reasons that I was talking about before, around educational opportunities and economic opportunities and violence. And so this is something that we need to make sure that we're taking into account. And lastly, disaster and crisis brings pronounced vulnerability as well. And when we get into the discussion, I can give examples of where we've seen that. And I'll stop there.
We'll actually be looking at that nexus as well. Thanks, Cliff. We'll just take a couple of questions. Any questions or comments to either Charlotte or Cliff?
And maybe we do this later on, but just some examples of operational integration of some of these, how to overcome some of these issues.
We will be doing that. Yeah, so
that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that'll be all. The rest of the day is actually going to be about looking at where people are missing in language. Questions, comments? I might just add one myself that I've worked for years in disaster work and disaster operations. And this particular facet was not on our radar at all. And when I started to research into it, I realized just all of the issues that led to that we had no idea of, totally invisible for LGBTI people. I was quite mortified, thinking what I had missed in all those years. And fancying myself a sensitive, analytic person. I did needs assessments. That was part of my job. I had to train other people to do that. Off my radar. So it's pretty confronting.
I guess a comment as much as a question. I think that it's while granted still very difficult, I think it's become more acceptable to raise the voice and concerns and put on the table the necessity to include disabled people as a group in our projects. But in a lot of the countries where we work, it can be very, very tricky with the LGBT groups, right? And so I've worked for a long time in Afghanistan. You can't bring that up as a group at sort of a higher political level and have a discussion with policymakers about that. You might be able to have some kind of dialogue at sort of the working level, but you really have to be very, very careful. I mean, there are a lot of countries where the same would be the case still for World Bank clients. So I'd just be curious how you sort of see teams deal with that.
Sure, I can respond to that quickly. I just say we take our lessons in this from the HIV response globally. In the HIV response, the development partners have been able to reach trans women and gay men with programming again and again and again in the most dire circumstances, including where same-sex sexual orientation is criminalized, including in Afghanistan, where I designed a gay and bisexual men's and men who have sex with men program that's ongoing in Afghanistan. And so we can do it. The issues you raise as cautions are absolutely the principles that we have to stand on. The approaches. We have to do it very sensitively. We have to be very careful because you don't want to make things worse for the people that you're trying to benefit, which is absolutely something that can happen. And so my rule of thumb, it's the same rule of thumb we use in development work broadly, and it should remain the rule of thumb. And that is, we should be listening to the people on the ground who are affected by whatever the problem is that we're trying to address, and take our cues from them as to how we begin to address that. And so that's how we've done it for gay men and trans women and HIV. And every country in the world, that's almost every country, has programs targeting these folks for HIV successfully. Not successfully enough, but getting it there. And so that's that. But it's a caution we have to keep in mind. Absolutely. Discussing with policymakers at a higher level, always problematic, and usually can only be done behind closed doors.
I'm going to have to take just one last comment. I'm going to have to end, unfortunately, next thing.
Sorry. So, do you think it's easier when you have targeted interventions, programs that are meant for HIV, AIDS prevention, or meant for people with disabilities, vis-a-vis programs that are generally, trying to integrate these communities into, whatever it is that we're doing in an education project or a health project? Plus, do you run up against this? Pushback that, we are so poor, this is such a poor country, we'll get to these populations when we can. Let's take care of, the broader masses here, and then let's get more specific.
Yeah, so I mean, to start with your last point first, we get that often, right? People say, well, country X is so poor. Seriously? You want us to think about children with disabilities? Well, the reality is that you've got a huge number of children with disabilities that will be poor. So it's not about it's not about separating them out. It's about including them when you think about the poverty intervention. So that's an important perspective. The extreme of that is I've been told by policymakers and officials that we don't have disabled people in our community, right? I mean, how is that possible? We just went around the table and each one of us were able to talk about, a family member or somebody that we know. So it's highly unlikely, it's completely impossible that an entire village does not have a disabled person. When somebody says something like that, then the question is, really? You need to unpack what that means. The point around, mainstreaming versus targeted, the approach that we like to support is one that's a twin track approach. Sometimes I think there's definitely a need for demonstrative projects, like, targeted projects that look at a particular aspect around inclusion, right? That will build the evidence, but I think need to be linked to larger ongoing projects, because the difficulty with standalone projects is they often remain standalone projects, right? They don't morph into changing the way we do development, and that's what essentially we want to do. We want to be able to ensure that the projects we design are nuanced and take into account all of these groups. And so if we have, a splattering of projects on disability and LGBTI and this and that, it doesn't really bring together the wealth of diversity. And so I think that, there's definitely space for standalone targeted disability projects. Or I'm sure, I imagine Cliff agrees with me, but how do you make sure that then becomes part of our broader operations? And we don't want to have like a parallel track of, all the social inclusion issues are out on their own, and then we have, the real bankable projects, and we definitely avoid that.
LGBTI, everything she said.
Okay, that's fantastic. Can we please actually thank our presenters? And we have Cliff until part of most of the day. We have Charlotte the rest of the day too. So take advantage, as I said before, of having them here. in your groups, working in your one-on-ones. So I'll actually put Cliff in a different group to show up, and I mix you around after to share the love. I have a question to ask you. We're a little behind, not unusual in a pilot, and I'm not surprised because this, the first session takes a little time. So I have a question for you. There was a brief presentation that I was going to do about disaster risk management for those in the group who aren't familiar with it at all. It's sort of like less than disaster 101. Who in the group has not had exposure to disaster risk management? It's a totally new subject for me. A couple of you. Okay. What I might do, I'm going to collapse this so much that you'll barely recognize what I'm doing, probably. Just enough for you to get through the terminology. Can our DRM colleagues please help our new people in your small groups when we start throwing around, which we'll start doing from this point on, all the jargon of disaster risk management and everything that accompanies it. If you could take note of the people who've never been exposed to it and give them a hand, that would be great. All good? Okay, the speed of light. This is for this module. We're now trying to get into unpacking the actual social differentiated impacts of hazard events and what causes it, and the barriers to inclusion in programming. That's what we're focusing on next. Okay. Very quickly, some people from the DRM world will gasp at this depiction of the disaster management cycle, and we can debate that another time. I always present it as a continuum and sometimes a circle. And the reason I do it is because this thing we call disaster risk reduction cuts across every other aspect of disaster. So I don't see it as a cycle, but I see it as a continuum where disaster risk reduction cuts across it all. That's just for the benefit of the DRM people, why the diagram is like this. The terms that you just need to be familiar with for the new people that are going to come up are these three. When we say disaster risk management basically concerns a number of areas of programming that we work in that people will break down into phases. It doesn't actually happen in phases, but for convenience, we tend to do it when we're working. There's the response relief phase after a disaster has struck. So that's all the emergency assistance, food, water, whatever people need to just survive. Rescue. Recovery is, you could say, what follows, that once people have got their food and water, what happens next? The survivors, what do we do to help them to restore their lost assets, their lost property, and to deal with the loss of loved ones or injuries, temporary, permanent, all of that. That work that takes place. But in essence, most people who have been affected by a disaster begin mentally, if not physically, entering that recovery process as soon as possible. Depends on how bad the shock's been and their space. But the vast majority of people are thinking, how do I get out of this? How do I rebuild my home where my losing all my life? How do I live without my husband, father, sister, mother? I've got development here because of the third element in disaster risk management. Main element that we look at is this disaster risk reduction, and it's pretty much the most important. This is the space where initiatives can be taken to try to reduce or even prevent negative impacts from disasters on people. And that can be done here, for example, in relief. In relief work, if we get cash out to people fast enough, poor people and people who've lost everything and have no recourse, if we get it out quick enough, then those people don't resort to what we call negative coping strategies, and that is selling off important assets and ending up in a poverty cycle that deepens and deepens. If you're from the social development sectors, you recognize this pattern with economic shocks like the food and fuel crisis of a few years ago. You can do the same thing in recovery. The easiest quick example is when you're building back schools, health centers, homes, that you can make them more disaster resilient if they weren't before. If they fell in an earthquake because they were not built to be earthquake-proof, then you can incorporate earthquake-proofing into the buildings you're putting up, and so thereby try to reduce some of that risk. That is a very fast, and of course, all through development, in programming that we're doing, you can integrate disaster risk management into it. So you can have, we've got good examples of community-driven development programs that have incorporated really effective community-based disaster risk management programs. So it's also about nesting in programs to reduce risk and help prevent loss of life and property. This is a quick depiction of the main element that we're dealing with in disaster risk management. We're trying to reduce risk. We're trying to assess risk, and we're trying to reduce it. This triangle is one the World Bank uses. I actually use something a bit different myself, but basically, it's the formula for how, in the context of a disaster, that we assess risk. What we look at is there's a natural hazard. Let's say it's that it's a place prone to landslides. But we used to think, this is the key point for the new people, we used to think they used to be called acts of God, disasters, things that could not be prevented. And it was believed that all we could do is prepare ourselves to help people after it happens and limit their losses. We have learned in more recent years that that's not the case. That yes, there is a hazard that somebody has to deal with, but different people have different levels of exposure. If I don't live near that hill that's prone to landslide, then I don't have a problem. So the degree of exposure, and if I live the closer I live, the more I'm exposed. The key thing here is the vulnerability in this formula. That actually a huge factor in your risk of having a disaster impact negatively on you is your vulnerability to that impact. So it's not an act of God in the sense that, I'll put it this way, if I'm a poor dweller in an informal settlement who has only, lives in a kind of really bad shack, and I collect firewood to try and make a living, and so do all my neighbors up that steep hillside, and we denude the whole thing. And the next big rainfall comes down, bang. It's going to be my house that's going to go. Someone may die in my house. If I had more money, I'd be able to build a better house, a stronger house potentially. Or if I had more assets and could afford insurance, I'd be in a position to replace what I had lost. So vulnerability is really key here in that learning. The other thing I just mentioned is, why do we keep putting together disaster risk management and climate change adaptation? And this is so quick and dirty, it's horrifying. So please do help round out people's knowledge. Is basically, among the many issues with climate change, we have found a pattern of increasing frequency and intensity of what I will now no longer call natural disasters, because of that formula before. These are hazard events that cause disaster impacts. So it's a hazard event that we haven't managed that turns into a disaster. So we have this big increase, which is in which climate change plays a role. It's not only climate change, and that huge increase in disasters is mostly weather-related hydrometeorological events. If you look, you can't probably see from there, but that's earthquakes, for example. So there's a big difference between the hydrometeorological and some of the types of disasters. And given that there is this increasing frequency and intensity, people who are vulnerable to negative impacts from disasters are now faced with a situation where the frequency and the severity may be increasing where they live. We have a hard time predicting exactly how it will take place, but people whose livelihoods depend on natural resources can be quite affected. And in terms of decisions about how they're going to cope, how they're going to adapt, if they're going to get endless drought where they didn't have it before, they may no longer be able to be a farmer, they may not even be able to live in that place. So it goes hand in glove that if you're looking at hazards in a context of increasing frequency and intensity, that one needs to assess and try to work out what are the risks involved in climate change related impacts. That is the quickest and dirtiest presentation I've ever given on that subject. I won't take questions. I'll let you talk to your colleagues to round that out a bit more. Did that give you a basic idea of where it sits? All right.